There comes a moment suspended between breath and heartbeat, between the known and the unknowable, when the soul turns inward and encounters its own reflection for the first time. Not the reflection in mirrors or in the approving eyes of others, but the deeper reflection that dwells in the still waters of consciousness itself. This is the awakening gaze, the first terrible and beautiful glimpse beyond the carefully constructed theater of our collective dreaming. You have lived, perhaps for years, perhaps for decades, wrapped in the gossamer threads of shared pretense. These threads are so fine, so carefully woven into the fabric of daily existence, that they become invisible. The very air you breathe, the ground upon which you walk, they whisper to you of who you should be, how you should move through the world, what dreams are acceptable to dream and which truths are too dangerous to speak aloud. They create what Jung called the persona, that mask we wear not only for others, but eventually tragically for ourselves. But the soul, that ancient knowing, that dwells beneath the layers of conditioning and expectation, grows restless in its chrysalis. It stirs with an intelligence older than thought, deeper than fear, and in that stirring, something begins to crack. The first hairline fracture appears in the wall between the conscious and the unconscious, between who you have been told you are and who you actually might be. The awakening gaze is born in this moment of fracture. It is not chosen, it chooses you, like lightning illuminating a darkened landscape for one brilliant instant. This gaze pierces through the veils of collective agreement and sees with startling clarity the elaborate performance in which you have been both actor and audience. You see the masks, not just your own, but the masks of everyone around you, each person playing their assigned role in the great unconscious drama of our time. This seeing is not comfortable. It is not the gentle awakening of fairy tales, where consciousness unfolds like a flower in morning sunlight. No, this is the violent beauty of birth itself, the necessary destruction that precedes all creation. The butterfly must literally dissolve within its chrysalis, its very structure breaking down into an undifferentiated soup, before it can reorganize itself into something capable of flight. The awakening gaze brings with it this same dissolution, not of the body, but of the carefully constructed identity that has carried you this far. In this moment of seeing, you recognize that what you have called reality is largely a shared hallucination, a collective agreement to pretend that the world is simpler, more solid, more predictable than it actually is. You see the tremendous energy that goes into maintaining these illusions, the constant vigilance required to keep certain thoughts unthought, certain feelings unfelt, certain truths unspoken. You witness the elaborate mechanisms of denial and projection that allow human beings to remain unconscious of their own unconsciousness. And in seeing this, you feel the first stirrings of what others might mistake for arrogance, but which is actually something far more vulnerable. The terrible loneliness of the one who sees clearly in a world that prefers comfortable blindness. This is not the loneliness of being disliked or misunderstood in the ordinary sense. This is the existential isolation of standing on a different shore of consciousness, watching others navigate by maps that you now recognize as fantasies. The persona, that carefully crafted image you have presented to the world, begins to feel like a costume that no longer fits. You find yourself moving through familiar social rituals with a growing sense of unreality, as if you are watching yourself perform in a play whose meaning has suddenly become incomprehensible. The words you are expected to say feel foreign on your tongue. The emotions you are supposed to feel seem borrowed from someone else's life. This is the sacred wound that Jung spoke of, the necessary injury that begins the process of individuation. Like the mythical figure of Chiron, the wounded healer, you discover that your capacity to see clearly comes not from a position of strength, but from a place of profound vulnerability. You have been broken open by truth, and in that breaking you discover spaces within yourself that you never knew existed. The gaze that awakens is neither kind nor cruel. It simply is. It looks upon the world with the neutrality of water finding its level, revealing the landscape of human consciousness with all its hidden valleys and secret peaks. You see the desperate hunger for approval that drives so much human behavior, the terror of abandonment that makes us cling to relationships that have long since ceased to nourish us, the ways we betray our own deepest knowing in service of belonging to groups that require us to remain unconscious. And yet, paradoxically, this same gaze that reveals our collective sleepwalking also awakens a profound compassion, for you recognize in others' struggles the echo of your own journey through the dark wood of unconsciousness. You see that their masks are not signs of weakness, but of survival strategies developed in response to a world that punishes authenticity and rewards conformity. Their illusions are not character flaws, but necessary defenses against truths they are not yet strong enough to bear. This recognition brings with it a terrible responsibility. You cannot unknow what you now know. You cannot return to the comfortable certainties that once provided shelter from the storm of existence. The gaze that has awakened within you will continue to see, to pierce, to reveal whether you wish it to or not. You have become an involuntary witness to the human condition in all its tragic beauty and beautiful tragedy. The journey of individuation that begins with this awakening is not about becoming superior to others. It is about becoming authentic to yourself, learning to distinguish between the voice of your true nature and the chorus of internalized expectations that has been directing your choices. It is about developing the courage to live from your center rather than your circumference, to speak your truth even when it isolates you from the crowd. But isolation, you discover, is not the same as loneliness. In the silence that follows the dissolution of false connections, you begin to hear the deeper rhythms of your own being. You learn to befriend the aspects of yourself that the persona could never accommodate, the wild, the questioning, the inconvenient parts of your nature that refuse to be domesticated by social expectation. The awakening gaze reveals that what we call normal is often a form of mutual hypnosis, agreement to remain unconscious together because consciousness is too demanding, too uncomfortable, too real. You see how much of human culture is designed to keep us distracted from the fundamental questions of existence, who we really are beneath our roles, what we truly value beyond what we've been taught to want, how we might live if we were not afraid of disapproval or abandonment. This seeing transforms you into what the mystics have called a stranger in a strange land, someone who walks among their own species but no longer speaks the same internal language. You find yourself translating constantly, learning to communicate across the chasm that now exists between your consciousness and the consciousness of those who have not yet experienced this awakening. You develop a kind of psychological bilingualism, able to function in both worlds but never again fully at home in either. The gaze that pierces illusion also illuminates the profound courage required simply to be human. You see that everyone is doing their best with the level of consciousness available to them, that every person is fighting battles invisible to others, carrying wounds that shape their perception in ways they cannot yet understand. Your judgment softens into something more complex, not approval or disapproval, but a kind of witnessing that holds space for the full spectrum of human experience. And so you learn to carry your clarity lightly, like a candle flame that illuminates without burning, that offers light to those who seek it while respecting the choices of those who prefer the darkness they know to the light they do not. You become a guardian of your own awakening, protecting the delicate flame of consciousness that has been kindled within you, while remaining open to whatever further transformations await. This is the beginning of the journey, not the end of unconsciousness, but the beginning of a conscious relationship with unconsciousness. You do not transcend the human condition. You penetrate more deeply into its mysteries. You do not rise above the collective. You learn to see it with unprecedented clarity, while remaining compassionately connected to its struggles. The awakening gaze is both blessing and burden, gift and responsibility. It marks the end of innocence and the beginning of wisdom, the death of who you thought you were, and the birth of who you are becoming. In this moment of first seeing, you step across a threshold from which there is no return, entering the great work of becoming conscious in a world that offers countless invitations to remain asleep. The eyes that have opened cannot close again. The questions that have been awakened will continue to seek their answers. The journey toward wholeness has begun, and though the path ahead is uncertain, you know with absolute certainty that you can never again pretend that what you have seen does not exist. The gossamer threads of collective pretense have been broken, and you emerge, blinking and raw, into the bright darkness of your own becoming. What others mistake for pride is the shadow work of the soul, the profound labor of one who has descended into the depths of human motivation and emerged with eyes that can no longer be deceived by surface appearances. You have become like the ancient alchemist, trained in the subtle art of discernment, able to distinguish the base metal of projection from the gold of authentic being. But this ability comes with a price that few understand, the terrible clarity that separates you from the collective dream. In the mythology of consciousness, you have become Cassandra, gifted with the sight that penetrates illusion, cursed with the knowledge that your visions will be dismissed as madness by those who cannot yet see what you see. You watch the human theater unfold before you, recognizing the unconscious scripts that drive each performance, the hidden fears and desires that puppet even the most seemingly confident actors across the stage of daily life. This is not the cold observation of the detached intellectual, but the warm and wounded seeing of one who has traveled through their own darkness and learned to recognize its reflection in others. You have made the difficult journey into your own shadow, that repository of all the aspects of yourself you are taught to reject, deny, or project onto others. In integrating these rejected parts, you have developed what Jung called the transcendent function, the ability to hold opposing truths in tension without collapsing into the comfort of false resolution. The shadow work has taught you that what we most despise in others is often what we most fear to acknowledge in ourselves. You see how the person who rails against dishonesty is often running from their own capacity for deception. You recognize how the one who judges others for their weakness is terrified of their own vulnerability. You understand that our strongest reactions are roadmaps to our own unconscious contents, projections that reveal more about the projector than the object of their judgment. And so you move through the world with a peculiar double vision. On one level, you engage with the personas and performances, understanding that these masks serve important psychological functions. You recognize that not everyone is ready for the full intensity of authentic encounter, that the persona exists precisely to protect the more vulnerable aspects of the psyche from exposure before they are strong enough to bear it. But beneath this surface engagement, your deeper sight operates continuously. You see the fear beneath the bravado, the longing beneath the cynicism, the wounded child beneath the armored adult. You recognize the ways that trauma has shaped perception, how early wounds continue to dictate choices decades after their infliction. You witness the elaborate defense mechanisms that keep people safe from truths they are not yet equipped to handle. This perception creates a profound loneliness, not the ordinary loneliness of being disliked or misunderstood, but the existential isolation of living simultaneously in multiple realities. You exist in the world of appearances, participating in its rituals and conversations, while also dwelling in the deeper world of psychological truth, where motivations are transparent and pretense becomes impossible to maintain. Others sense this dual existence without understanding it. They feel somehow exposed in your presence, as if you can see through their carefully constructed presentations to something they themselves have forgotten exists. This creates what Jung identified as the phenomenon of projection, where your clarity becomes a mirror that reflects back their own disowned aspects, and they respond by attributing to you the very qualities they cannot yet acknowledge in themselves. They call you arrogant, because your presence reminds them of their own capacity for authentic power. They label you judgmental because your peace with your own shadow highlights their ongoing war with theirs. They accuse you of superiority because your comfort with psychological truth threatens their investment in psychological fiction. The very clarity that has cost you so much to achieve becomes, in their perception, evidence of your failings rather than your growth. But you have learned something that the unconscious cannot understand. The true sight is born not of judgment, but of radical acceptance. To see clearly requires that you first learn to see yourself clearly, with all your contradictions, your petty fears, your moments of weakness and self-deception. The gaze that can penetrate others' illusions has first been trained on the mirror of your own psyche, learning to love what it finds there not because it is perfect, but because it is real. This training in self-observation has taught you that the ego's need to be right, to be superior, to be special, is itself one of the greatest illusions. You have watched your own ego perform its elaborate dances of self-justification and recognized that what appears as confidence is often compensation. What seems like strength is frequently defended weakness. What looks like wisdom may be disguised fear of appearing foolish. The shadow work has shown you that the aspects of yourself you most wanted to deny or transcend are often the very qualities that, when integrated consciously, become sources of authentic power. Your anger, when no longer projected outward, becomes boundary-setting energy. Your selfishness, when acknowledged and owned, transforms into healthy self-care. Your darkness, when befriended rather than banished, becomes the rich soil from which your most creative gifts can grow. This integration creates what appears to others as a paradox. Someone who can see through pretense without being cynical, who can recognize illusion without becoming bitter, who can witness unconsciousness without losing compassion. You have learned that true psychological maturity involves holding space for the full spectrum of human experience, understanding that consciousness is not a destination but a process, not an achievement but a practice. The awakening gaze reveals that most of what we call personality is actually a collection of survival strategies, learned responses to a world that seemed too dangerous or overwhelming to meet with our authentic selves. You see how the class clown developed humor as armor against rejection, how the perfectionist learned to control their environment through flawless performance, how the rebel found identity in opposition because agreement felt like annihilation of the self. But you also see something more beautiful, the essential self that exists beneath these strategies. The core being that remains untouched by the wounds and adaptations of personal history. In your own journey toward this essential self, you have learned to distinguish between the voice of authentic intuition and the voice of internalized authority. You have discovered that beneath the layers of should and must and ought lies a knowing that needs no external validation, a truth that exists independent of approval or understanding. This knowing transforms your relationship to others' opinions of you, not because you no longer care about connection. Indeed, your capacity for genuine intimacy has deepened, but because you no longer confuse others' perceptions with reality itself. You understand that when someone calls you arrogant, they are often responding to their own discomfort with authentic power. When they label you as judgmental, they may be projecting their own harsh inner critic onto your peaceful self-acceptance. The gaze that has awakened within you operates like a divining rod, sensing the underground rivers of unconscious motivation that flow beneath the surface of social interaction. You feel the currents of projection and transference, the ways that present moments become contaminated with the undigested past. You recognize when someone is responding not to you as you are, but to you as a symbol of their own unlived potentials or unhealed wounds. This recognition brings with it a kind of cosmic humor, the ability to see the divine comedy in human psychological drama without losing empathy for the very real suffering that these dramas contain. You learn to hold both truths simultaneously, that our unconscious patterns are often absurd in their predictability, and that they serve important protective functions for psyches that are doing their best to survive in a complex and often hostile world. The awakening gaze teaches you that consciousness is not a hierarchy with awakened souls at the top and unconscious masses below. Rather, it is an ocean with different depths, and everyone is swimming at the level that their current capacity allows. Some are playing in the shallows of surface interaction. Others are diving deep into the mysterious waters of the psyche. Neither position is inherently superior. They are simply different relationships to the vast mystery of being human. As this understanding settles into your bones, you begin to develop what might be called the ethics of seeing. You learn when to share your perceptions and when to keep them private, when someone is genuinely asking for truth, and when they are simply looking for validation of their existing beliefs. You discover that true wisdom lies not in forcing others to see what you see, but in creating safe spaces where they might choose to remove their own masks when they feel ready. The burden of clear sight is that you can no longer participate innocently in collective illusions. You cannot pretend that small talk is meaningful when you see the profound loneliness it often masks. You cannot engage in gossip when you recognize it as a form of unconscious shadow projection. You cannot participate in the mutual flattery and ego-stroking that passes for so much social interaction when you see how these patterns keep everyone trapped in their personas. And yet you learn to navigate this landscape with grace, understanding that your role is not to shatter others' illusions but to embody an alternative way of being. You become a living demonstration that it is possible to see clearly without becoming hardened, to be authentic without being cruel, to tell the truth without weapons of superiority or judgment. The awakening gaze marks the beginning of what Jung called the opus contra naturam, the work against nature, the conscious effort to become who you truly are rather than who conditioning has made you. This work is not natural in the sense that it goes against the ego's natural tendency toward unconsciousness, comfort, and the path of least resistance. It requires a kind of voluntary suffering, the willingness to feel the discomfort of seeing clearly rather than seeking the comfort of familiar blindness. In this beginning, you sense that you are embarking on a journey that has no final destination, no point at which you can declare yourself fully awakened and rest in the certainty of your achievement. The gaze that has opened will continue to deepen, to reveal new layers of illusion, to call you toward ever greater authenticity and truth. You have crossed a threshold from which there is no return, and ahead lies the long, beautiful, terrible work of becoming conscious in an unconscious world. The sacred wound has been opened. The journey toward your true face has begun. There comes a time in the journey of consciousness when the soul must choose between the exhausting performance of perpetual engagement and the sacred necessity of withdrawal. This is not the retreat of the defeated, but the strategic withdrawal of the wise, like the hermit in the ancient tarot, who carries the lantern of inner knowing into the darkness. not to escape the world, but to preserve the flame of truth in a realm where it can burn without being extinguished by the winds of collective unconsciousness. You have learned to see too much. The elaborate theater of human interaction, once mysterious and engaging, has become transparent to your awakened perception. You watch the endless cycles of projection and counter-projection, the desperate dances of ego seeking validation, the unconscious agreements that keep entire communities locked in shared delusions. What once seemed like meaningful social connection now reveals itself as a complex web of mutual enabling, each person supporting the other's need to remain unconscious, because consciousness would demand too much change, too much responsibility, too much uncomfortable truth. The hermit's withdrawal is not born of misanthropy, but of preservation, like the mythical phoenix that must retreat to its funeral pyre before it can be reborn. The awakened soul recognizes that sometimes the most radical act is to step away from the consuming flames of collective drama and tend the quieter fire of inner transformation. This retreat is a form of conscious sacrifice. You sacrifice the comfort of belonging in order to preserve your capacity for authentic seeing. In the silence of withdrawal, you begin to understand that solitude and loneliness are not the same thing. Loneliness is the ache of disconnection from others. Solitude is the deep peace of connection with yourself. In the space of voluntary aloneness, you discover that you are never truly alone. You are accompanied by the vast intelligence of the unconscious, by the archetypal energies that flow through all human experience, by the timeless wisdom that speaks through symbol and dream and synchronicity. The hermit's lantern is the light of individual consciousness that refuses to be dimmed by the darkness of collective unconsciousness. You carry this light not as a weapon against others' ignorance, but as a beacon for your own continued becoming. In the quiet spaces of retreat, you learn to distinguish between the voice of your authentic intuition and the internalized chorus of social expectations that continues to echo in your psyche long after you have physically withdrawn from its source. This is the phase Jung called the dark night of the soul, not because it is joyless, but because it requires you to find meaning and purpose independent of external validation. You must learn to trust your own inner compass when all the familiar landmarks of social approval have been left behind. You discover that the opinions of others, which once seemed so important, were often simply mirrors reflecting their own unresolved conflicts rather than accurate assessments of your worth or truth. In withdrawal, you encounter the profound difference between aloneness and abandonment. Abandonment is what the ego fears, being left without the constant reassurance that comes from fitting in, being understood, being approved of by the group. But aloneness, you discover, is a form of coming home to yourself. It is the return to your own center after years of living from your circumference, oriented toward others' needs and expectations rather than your own deep knowing. The hermit learns to befriend the aspects of consciousness that can only emerge in silence. In the absence of external stimulation and social performance, subtler forms of awareness begin to surface. You become sensitive to the rhythm of your own energy, learning to recognize when you are operating from authentic inspiration and when you are simply going through familiar motions. You develop the capacity to hear the whispered guidance of the unconscious, which is often drowned out by the noise of social engagement. This withdrawal is not permanent isolation. It is a temporary retreat that allows for the reorganization of consciousness at a deeper level, like the seed that must be buried in dark earth before it can sprout toward light. The soul sometimes requires periods of hiddenness in order to gather the energy necessary for its next phase of growth. You are not running away from life. You are returning to the source of life within yourself. In the hermit's cave of solitude, You begin to understand how much energy you have been expending in the attempt to make others comfortable with your clarity. You see how you have learned to dim your light, to soften your perceptions, to translate your insights into language that would not threaten others' investment in their illusions. This translation work, while sometimes necessary and compassionate, has also been a form of self-betrayal, a gradual erosion of your connection to your own truth. The withdrawal allows you to reclaim this energy, to stop the constant work of making yourself smaller, so that others can feel larger. You learn to honor your perceptions without apologizing for them, to trust your intuition without seeking external confirmation, to value your own insight especially when it contradicts the consensus reality around you. In this sacred space of aloneness, you encounter what the mystics have called the beloved within, the aspect of yourself that has always loved you unconditionally, that has never required you to be anyone other than who you authentically are. This inner beloved does not judge your seeing as arrogance or your withdrawal as antisocial behavior. It understands that consciousness is a form of loving service to the larger whole, especially when that service is misunderstood or unappreciated. The hermit's lantern illuminates not only the path forward, but also the journey behind. In the quiet of retreat, you can finally see clearly the patterns that brought you to this point of necessary withdrawal. You recognize how your sensitivity to unconscious dynamics, your ability to see through pretense, your refusal to participate in collective self-deception, has gradually set you apart from communities that required unconsciousness as the price of membership. This recognition brings both grief and relief. Grief for the connections that could not survive your growing authenticity, for the relationships that were built on mutual unconsciousness and could not adapt to your increasing clarity, but also relief, the deep exhale of finally acknowledging that these connections, however familiar and comfortable, were ultimately false, built on personas rather than authentic selves, sustained by agreement to remain unconscious rather than by genuine intimacy. The hermit discovers that withdrawal from false connection creates space for true connection, first and most importantly, connection with yourself. In the absence of external distraction, you begin to hear the deeper rhythms of your own being. You learn to distinguish between the anxiety that comes from ignoring your authentic nature and the peace that comes from honoring it. You develop trust in your own perceptions, even when they contradict popular opinion or accepted wisdom. This is the phase where you learn to become your own best friend, your own wisest counselor, your own most trusted advisor. You stop outsourcing your sense of reality to others and begin to trust the authority of your own experience. This does not make you closed to input from others, but it means that you filter all external information through the discerning intelligence of your own integrated consciousness, rather than automatically deferring to others' opinions or expertise. In the hermit's retreat, you also encounter the profound creativity that emerges when consciousness is no longer directed outward in performance, but turned inward toward genuine self-expression. Without the need to make your thoughts and feelings acceptable to others, you discover aspects of yourself that have been waiting in the wings of your awareness, artistic impulses, philosophical insights, spiritual yearnings that could not emerge while you were busy maintaining your social persona. The lantern of the hermit is fed by the oil of authentic solitude, growing brighter as you learn to value your own company above the false connection of unconscious community. You realize that you would rather be alone with truth than together in illusion, that the quality of consciousness matters more than the quantity of relationships, that one moment of authentic encounter is worth more than years of surface-level social interaction. And yet this withdrawal is not misanthropy. In learning to love yourself unconditionally, you develop the capacity to love others, without the desperate need for them to be different than they are. Your retreat from false connection creates space for the possibility of true connection, relationships based on authentic seeing and being seen, rather than on mutual persona maintenance. The hermit's path teaches you that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to stop participating in others' unconscious patterns by refusing to enable their projection, their denial, their need for you to be smaller so they can feel comfortable. You create a small crack in their reality that might, someday, become an opening for their own awakening. Your withdrawal becomes a form of service, not the service of helping others remain unconscious, but the service of modeling what it looks like to live consciously. In the depths of this necessary aloneness, you begin to understand that what you had mistaken for social rejection was actually a form of natural selection, consciousness calling to consciousness, authenticity recognizing authenticity. The relationships that could not survive your growing clarity were not meant to survive. They served their purpose in your development, but they belonged to an earlier phase of your journey when you still believed that being understood by others was more important than understanding yourself. The hermit carries the lantern, not only for their own journey but as a lighthouse for others who may be ready to begin their own descent into authentic selfhood. Your withdrawal from unconscious community becomes an invitation to conscious solitude, a demonstration that it is possible to find meaning and purpose and deep satisfaction in life without sacrificing your truth for the sake of belonging. The flame burns steady in the hermit's hand, fed by the oil of hard-won wisdom, protected by the glass of conscious choice. In this sacred retreat, you are not abandoning the world. You are preparing to return to it with a deeper capacity to serve its highest good, no longer as an unconscious participant in its dramas, but as a conscious witness to its potential for transformation. Within the alchemical laboratory of consciousness, there burns a fire unlike any flame that consumes wood or coal. This is the fire of discernment, a sacred burning that does not destroy, but transforms, that does not consume but purifies, that separates the essential from the extraneous with the precision of divine intelligence. To wield this fire is to participate in the great work of psychological alchemy, where the base metal of unconscious reaction is transmuted into the gold of conscious response. This fire ignites not through force or effort, but through the natural maturation of consciousness itself. Like the slow burning that transforms carbon into diamond under the pressure of time and earth, the soul develops its capacity for discernment through the accumulated weight of experience, through the patient observation of its own patterns and reactions, through the gradual recognition of what serves arctic growth and what merely feeds the ego's endless hunger for validation and control. You have learned to see through the elaborate defense mechanisms that govern unconscious behavior, not because you sought to judge others, but because you first learned to recognize these same mechanisms in yourself. The fire of discernment began as self-observation, the willingness to watch your own ego perform its familiar dances of self-justification, its strategies of blame and projection, its desperate attempts to maintain the illusion of being special, right, or superior to others. This inner work has taught you that what appears as arrogance in others is often the ego's defense against feeling insignificant. You see how the person who constantly seeks to prove their intelligence is defending against a deep fear of being stupid, how the one who projects strength is often hiding from their own vulnerability, how those who most loudly proclaim their enlightenment are frequently struggling with the most basic forms of self-deception. But the fire of discernment burns away not only others' illusions, but your own. In its light, you see how your own spiritual pride once disguised itself as humility, how your judgment of others' unconsciousness was itself a form of unconsciousness, how your need to be the one who sees clearly was another elaborate construction of the ego seeking specialness through a different route. This recognition creates what Jung called enantiodromia, the transformation of a quality into its opposite. Your judgment becomes compassion as you recognize in others' struggles the echo of your own journey through unconsciousness. Your sense of superiority transforms into grateful humility as you understand how much grace was required for your own awakening, how little credit you can claim for gifts that were given rather than earned. The alchemical fire reveals that true discernment operates through love rather than judgment. It sees through others' masks, not to expose their nakedness, but to recognize the wounded child or the frightened ego that wears these masks for protection. It pierces through pretense not to destroy it, but to understand the function it serves, the pain it attempts to heal, the terror it seeks to avoid. This loving perception creates a paradox that the unconscious mind cannot comprehend. You can see through someone's psychological defenses while simultaneously honoring their need for those defenses. You can recognize their unconscious patterns while respecting their current capacity for consciousness. You can hold space for their potential transformation while accepting them exactly as they are in this moment. The fire burns away the need to be understood or appreciated for your clarity. You begin to understand that consciousness is its own reward, that the ability to see clearly is itself a form of grace that requires no external validation. The peace that comes from living authentically becomes more valuable than the approval that comes from performing unconsciously. The integrity of your own psychological development matters more than others' opinions about your journey. This detachment from external validation allows the fire of discernment to burn even more brightly. No longer does your perception become clouded by the need to be liked or accepted. You can see situations and people with increasing clarity because you are no longer invested in seeing them in particular ways that would maintain your own ego's comfort or superiority. In the crucible of this inner fire, you learn to distinguish between the voice of authentic intuition and the voice of psychological projection. Authentic intuition arises from the integrated self. It is clear, calm, and compassionate, even when it perceives difficult truths. Projection, by contrast, carries the emotional charge of unresolved inner conflicts. It sees in others what we cannot yet acknowledge in ourselves, and it judges with the heat of our own disowned emotions. The alchemical fire teaches you that true psychological maturity involves learning to metabolize your own emotions rather than projecting them onto others. When you feel judgment arising toward someone's behavior, you learn to pause and ask, what in myself am I seeing reflected in this person? What unintegrated aspect of my own shadow is being triggered by their actions? This inner inquiry transforms potential criticism into valuable self-knowledge. You discover that the people who most irritate you are often your greatest teachers, because they mirror back aspects of yourself that you have not yet learned to love or integrate. The person whose neediness triggers your judgment may be reflecting your own disowned dependency needs. The one whose arrogance infuriates you may be showing you your own unacknowledged superiority complex. The individual whose unconsciousness frustrates you may be demonstrating the very patterns you once embodied before your own awakening began. This recognition burns away the last vestiges of spiritual superiority. The fire of discernment reveals that consciousness is not an achievement that places you above others, but a responsibility that calls you to deeper service. Your ability to see clearly becomes not a source of pride, but a tool for compassionate understanding. Your psychological development transforms from a personal accomplishment into a gift you can offer to the larger healing of human consciousness. The alchemical process shows you that what you once mistook for others' character flaws are often their wounded attempts at wholeness. The controlling person is trying to create safety in a world that felt chaotic. The people pleaser is attempting to ensure love in a reality that taught them their authentic self was unacceptable. The narcissist is defending against a core wound of feeling fundamentally unlovable. The fire of discernment sees through the symptom to the underlying pain, through the defense to the vulnerability it protects. This deeper seeing transforms your relationship to human suffering. You no longer see others' unconscious patterns as evidence of their moral failing or lack of intelligence. Instead, you recognize these patterns as creative, albeit limited, solutions to impossible psychological dilemmas. You understand that everyone is doing their best with the level of consciousness and resources available to them, that what appears as willful ignorance is often the psyche's protective mechanism against truths it is not yet strong enough to bear. The fire burns away your attachment to being the one who knows, who sees, who understands. You realize that consciousness is not a possession to be hoarded, but a flowing river in which all beings participate according to their capacity. Your role is not to drag others into deeper waters, but to be fully present in whatever depth you have reached, trusting that your authenticity will naturally invite others to explore their own potential for awakening. In the laboratory of conscious solitude, you learn to work with the raw materials of your own psyche, the lead of your unintegrated emotions, the mercury of your quicksilver thoughts, the sulfur of your passionate nature. Through the patient application of consciousness, these base materials begin their slow transformation into psychological gold. Not perfection, but integration. Not the absence of darkness, but the conscious relationship with darkness that allows it to serve rather than sabotage your development. The alchemical fire teaches you that every person you encounter is engaged in their own version of this great work, whether they know it or not. The businessman who seems focused only on profit may be working unconsciously with themes of value and worth. The mother who appears to sacrifice everything for her children may be exploring questions of service and selflessness. The rebel who rejects all authority may be grappling with issues of personal power and autonomy. Your discernment learns to see the sacred in the apparently profane, the archetypal patterns that play out through even the most mundane human interactions. You recognize that behind every persona is a soul engaged in its own journey toward wholeness, that every projection contains a seed of truth about both the projector and the object of projection, that every conflict carries the potential for greater consciousness if approached with wisdom rather than reactivity. The fire reveals that what you once experienced as others' resistance to your truth was often their unconscious recognition that your presence demanded growth from them, not because you preached or judged, but because authenticity naturally calls forth authenticity, because consciousness inevitably illuminates unconsciousness simply through its presence. You understand now that their discomfort was not about you personally, but about the invitation to greater awareness that your clarity represented. This understanding brings a profound release from the need to be understood or appreciated for your psychological work. You realize that consciousness serves itself. It does not require recognition or reward to justify its existence. The peace you have found through inner work, the clarity you have developed through shadow integration, the compassion you have cultivated through accepting your own humanity. These are gifts that enrich your existence regardless of whether others acknowledge or value them. The alchemical fire burns away the last traces of Messiah complex, the ego's subtle attempt to find specialness through spiritual or psychological superiority. You see that your journey toward consciousness does not make you humanity's savior, that simply makes you more fully human. Your ability to see clearly does not give you the right to force others to see, but it does give you the responsibility to live authentically from your own clarity. In the culmination of this phase, You learn to hold your discernment lightly, like a master craftsman who wields their tools with effortless skill rather than heavy-handed force. Your perception becomes a gentle instrument of understanding rather than a sword of judgment. You can see through illusion without the need to destroy it, recognize unconsciousness without the compulsion to correct it, witness suffering without the desperate urge to fix it. The fire that once threatened to consume you in its intensity now burns as a steady flame of integrated wisdom. You have learned to tend this fire consciously, to feed it with truthfulness and compassion rather than with judgment and superiority. You understand that this flame is not yours alone. It is part of the larger fire of consciousness that burns within all beings, and your responsibility is simply to keep your small portion burning bright and clean. The alchemical work continues, but it no longer feels like work. It has become the natural expression of your authentic nature, the way you participate in the larger transformation of human consciousness. The fire of discernment burns within you, not as a burden but as a blessing, not as a source of isolation but as a bridge to deeper connection with the mystery of being human. In the depths of the collective unconscious lies a vast mirror, dark and undisturbed, reflecting truths that humanity has spent millennia learning not to see. When you develop the capacity for clear sight, you become this mirror not by choice, but by the natural function of integrated consciousness. You reflect back to others what they have hidden from themselves, and in this reflection the phenomenon of projection reveals itself with startling clarity. The collective unconscious speaks through you now, whether you will it or not. Your presence becomes a tuning fork that resonates with the disowned frequencies of others' psyches, calling forth from the shadows all that they have rejected, denied, or refused to acknowledge about themselves. This is not a power you wield consciously. It is the inevitable result of having developed an authentic relationship with your own shadow material. Having integrated what you once rejected in yourself, you naturally evoke in others the confrontation with what they still refuse to see. Jung understood that we can only see in others what already exists within ourselves, either in conscious awareness or hidden in the shadows of our unconscious. When someone encounters you, someone who has done the difficult work of shadow integration, they are forced to confront aspects of themselves that their ego has successfully kept buried. Your peace with your own darkness becomes a mirror that reflects their unacknowledged darkness. Your comfort with your own power illuminates their disowned power. Your acceptance of your own complexity reveals their rejected complexity. The collective responds to this mirroring with the ancient mechanism of scapegoating. Rather than face what you reflect back to them about themselves, they project onto you the very qualities they cannot tolerate in their own psyche. You become the container for their disowned arrogance, their unacknowledged superiority, their hidden judgment. They point to you and say, "There is the problem," not recognizing that what they see in you is actually what they refuse to see in themselves. This projection serves a crucial psychological function for the collective. By making you the carrier of their shadow material, they can maintain the illusion of their own innocence, their own humility, their own spiritual correctness. They can continue to sleep the sleep of unconsciousness while pointing to your awakenness as evidence of your falling. They transform your consciousness into your sin, your clarity into your arrogance, your authenticity into your crime against the collective agreement to remain unconscious. You become like the child in Hans Christian Andersen's tale who dares to speak the truth about the emperor's nakedness. Your very existence threatens the collective's investment in a shared illusion. Your refusal to participate in mutual self-deception becomes, in their perception, an act of aggression against the community's need for comfortable lies. They experience your truth-telling not as a gift, but as an attack, not as illumination but as exposure. The collective mirror shows you how much energy human communities invest in maintaining their shared delusions. You see the elaborate systems of mutual validation that keep everyone locked in their personas, the unconscious agreements to never look too deeply or question too thoroughly, the subtle punishments that await those who dare to step outside the boundaries of acceptable awareness. But you also see something more profound, that this collective resistance to truth is itself a form of protection. The mass of humanity is not ready for the full intensity of conscious living. They need their illusions the way children need their security blankets, not from weakness, but from the simple fact that consciousness is demanding, that truth requires more psychological resources than most people have yet developed. Your role as the collective's mirror teaches you the delicate art of holding space for truth without forcing it upon those who are not ready to receive it. You learn to be available to clarity without becoming evangelical about consciousness. You discover that the most radical thing you can do is simply to live authentically, allowing your presence to be an invitation rather than a demand, a possibility rather than a requirement. The projection that flows toward you becomes a source of valuable information about the collective psyche. You learn to read these projections like a map of the cultural shadow, understanding what aspects of human nature society most desperately needs to integrate. When you are accused of arrogance, you see the collective's discomfort with authentic power. When you are labeled as judgmental, you recognize the community's fear of honest self-examination. When you are called superior, you understand the group's terror of individual development that transcends collective mediocrity. This understanding transforms your relationship to criticism and rejection. You no longer take others' projections personally because you can see them as symptoms of the collective's psychological health, rather than accurate assessments of your character. You recognize that when someone calls you arrogant, they are often responding to their own disowned capacity for confidence. When they label you as cold, they may be encountering their own repressed emotional numbness. When they accuse you of thinking you're better than others, they are usually projecting their own superiority complex that they cannot yet acknowledge. The collective mirror reveals the profound loneliness of individual development in a culture that rewards conformity and punishes authenticity. You see how the tall poppy syndrome operates not just in obvious ways, but through subtle mechanisms of social pressure that keep everyone regulated to the same level of comfortable unconsciousness. You understand why so many people choose to remain small, not from lack of capacity but from accurate perception of the social consequences of becoming too large, too bright, too real. But the mirror also shows you something that gives you hope, that consciousness is contagious. Your refusal to participate in collective unconsciousness creates tiny fissures in the shared reality, small cracks through which light can enter. Your authenticity gives others permission to question their own performances. Your peace with your shadow invites others to explore their own darkness. Your comfort with being misunderstood models the possibility of living from internal validation rather than external approval. You begin to understand that your function as the collective's mirror is not about changing others, but about serving the larger evolution of consciousness itself. By maintaining your clarity in the face of projection, by refusing to shrink back into unconsciousness when others demand it, by continuing to live authentically despite the social consequences, you are participating in humanity's slow awakening to its own potential. The collective unconscious works through individuals, and you have become one of its instruments of self-awareness. Through you, the larger psyche of humanity begins to see itself more clearly. Your individual journey toward consciousness serves the collective journey, even when, especially when the collective resists and rejects your contribution. This realization brings a profound shift in how you understand your role in the world. You are not here to save others, or to force them into consciousness. You are here to be conscious yourself, to live as fully and authentically as your current development allows, to serve as a mirror for those who are ready to see and as a gentle presence for those who are not. The mirror you have become reflects not just shadow material but also unlived potentials. Others see in you not just what they have rejected in themselves, but also what they might become if they had the courage to undertake their own journey of individuation. Your development becomes a reminder of their own untapped possibilities, which can trigger either inspiration or resentment, depending on their relationship to their own growth. You learn to hold this projective material with increasing skill, like a psychologist who can receive a patient's transferences without becoming identified with them. You understand that when others make you the container for their disowned material, they are unconsciously seeking healing through relationship with someone who has integrated what they have rejected. Your function becomes that of a psychic container, holding space for aspects of the human experience that others cannot yet hold for themselves. The collective mirror teaches you that transformation happens not through direct confrontation but through patient modeling. By living from your integrated consciousness, by refusing to be pulled back into unconscious patterns despite the pressure to conform, by maintaining your authenticity in the face of misunderstanding, you create a field of possibility that others can enter when they are ready. In time, you discover that being the collective's mirror is both honor and burden, service and sacrifice. You carry not only your own psychological material but also serve as a repository for aspects of the human experience that society needs to integrate, but is not yet ready to claim. You become a living symbol of human potential, and like all symbols you are both revered and reviled, both sought after and rejected by those who encounter the truth you represent. The mirror reflects without preference, judgment, or agenda. It simply shows what is, allowing others to see themselves more clearly, if they have the courage to look. In becoming this mirror for the collective, you learn to embody the same neutrality, reflecting truth without attachment to whether it is received with gratitude or resistance, offering clarity without investment in whether it leads to transformation or deeper unconsciousness. This is the profound service of the awakened soul in an unconscious world, to serve as a mirror for the collective shadow, while maintaining the compassion to understand why that shadow was rejected in the first place, to hold space for humanity's unlived potentials while accepting the pace at which consciousness chooses to evolve, to be a clear reflection of what is possible while honoring what is actual in this moment. The collective's mirror shows all things with equal clarity, the beauty and the horror, the wisdom and the folly, the light and the darkness that together comprise the full spectrum of human experience. In becoming this mirror, you participate in the great work of making the unconscious conscious, of bringing into the light what has been hidden in darkness, of serving the larger awakening of human consciousness through the faithful mirror of your own transformed awareness. In the mysterious realm of psychological transformation, there exists a law, as reliable as gravity, as inevitable as the changing seasons. Jung's principle of enantiodromia, the tendency of all things to flow into their opposite when they reach their extreme expression. It is here, in this sacred reversal, that the deepest understanding of your journey begins to emerge. What others perceive as arrogance may actually be humility so profound that it has circled back upon itself, appearing as its shadow to eyes that have not yet learned to see beyond the surface of things. True humility, you discover, is not the self-deprecating performance that our culture often mistakes for modesty. It is not the constant diminishment of yourself to make others comfortable, nor the reflexive apology for taking up space in the world. Genuine humility is born from the depths of self-knowledge, the unflinching recognition of both your magnificence and your ordinariness. your wisdom and your foolishness, your capacity for great love, and your potential for great harm. This authentic humility emerges only after you have journeyed through the valley of your own shadow, only after you have faced the aspects of yourself that you once found unacceptable, only after you have learned to love the human being you actually are, rather than the idealized version you thought you should become. It is the humility of one who has seen their own capacity for self-deception and emerged with compassion for the universal human tendency toward unconsciousness. But to those who have not undertaken this inner journey, your peace with yourself appears as arrogance. Your comfort with your own authority seems like superiority. Your refusal to diminish yourself to maintain others' comfort reads as hubris. They cannot distinguish between the ego's inflation and the self's natural confidence, between the persona's performance of humility and the authentic humility that comes from deep self-acceptance. The enantiodromia of understanding reveals that what appears as confidence in the awakened soul is actually the result of having thoroughly explored their own insecurity. You have descended into the depths of your own self-doubt, your own fears of inadequacy, your own terror of being found wanting. In that descent you discovered that these fears, when faced directly, lose their power to control your behavior. You learned that you could survive being imperfect, being human, being real. This survival creates what others perceive as unshakable confidence, but which is actually something more subtle. The quiet authority of one who no longer needs to prove themselves, because they have already proven to themselves that they can face whatever truths emerge from honest self-examination. Your apparent certainty is actually the peace of uncertainty integrated. The calm that comes from no longer needing to know everything or be right about everything or control the outcomes of your authenticity. The reversal principle shows you that your journey through darkness has prepared you to carry light without being blinded by it. Having explored your own capacity for unconsciousness, you can now embody consciousness without spiritual pride. Having faced your own potential for harm, you can now exercise power without corruption. Having acknowledged your own capacity for self-deception, you can now speak truth without righteousness. This integration of opposites creates a presence that others find difficult to categorize. You are simultaneously confident and humble, strong and vulnerable, knowing and uncertain. You embody what Jung called the transcendent function, the ability to hold contradictory truths in dynamic tension rather than collapsing into the false comfort of one-sided positions. To the unconscious observer, this complexity appears as inconsistency or worse, as a kind of spiritual arrogance that claims to be beyond ordinary human limitations. They cannot understand how you can be so certain and so uncertain at the same time, so strong and so gentle, so perceptive and so accepting. Their either-or thinking cannot accommodate the both-and reality of integrated consciousness. The enantiodromia reveals that what others interpret as your belief in your own superiority is actually your deep acceptance of your own ordinariness. You have looked unflinchingly at your own mediocrity, your own petty jealousies and small-minded moments, your own capacity for selfishness and self-deception. In accepting these aspects of yourself as simply human rather than shameful, you have developed the capacity to see others' similar struggles with compassion rather than judgment. This acceptance paradoxically liberates you from the need to be special, to be better than others, to prove your worth through achievement or recognition. Having made peace with your own humanity, you no longer need to compensate for feelings of inadequacy through superiority complexes or spiritual materialism. Your ordinariness becomes extraordinary precisely because it is so thoroughly owned and integrated. But to those still caught in the ego's endless quest for specialness, your peace with ordinariness appears as a kind of arrogance. How dare you be so comfortable with yourself? when they are still struggling to prove their worth. Your lack of need for external validation triggers their own desperate hunger for approval. Your comfort with being human highlights their own discomfort with their humanity. The reversal principle teaches you that the qualities you have integrated through shadow work, your capacity for selfishness, anger, judgment, pride, no longer operate unconsciously, but have been transformed into conscious tools. Your integrated selfishness becomes healthy self-care. Your integrated anger becomes clear boundary setting. Your integrated judgment becomes discerning wisdom. Your integrated pride becomes authentic self-respect. To others, these integrated qualities may appear as their shadow expressions, because they have not yet learned to distinguish between unconscious possession by an archetype and conscious relationship with that same energy. They see your healthy self-care and call it selfishness, because they have not yet learned to care for themselves without guilt. They witness your clear boundaries and call them coldness, because they have not yet developed the capacity to say no without apologizing for their existence. The enantiodromia of your development shows you that consciousness is not about transcending human nature, but about befriending it so completely that it can serve rather than sabotage your highest aspirations. You have not risen above the human condition. You have descended so deeply into it that you have found its sacred core, the divine spark that exists within even the most apparently profane expressions of human psychology. This descent into humanity has paradoxically elevated your capacity to serve the evolution of consciousness. By accepting your own darkness, you can now help others navigate theirs. By integrating your own shadow, you can now hold space for others' projections without being destabilized by them. By making peace with your own ordinariness, you can now appreciate the extraordinary within the ordinary experiences of daily life. The understanding that emerges from this process is that consciousness is not a ladder with some people higher than others, but an ocean with different depth available to different swimmers at different times. You have learned to dive deep, not because you are superior to those who prefer the shallows, but because your particular journey required that depth, because your soul's curriculum included lessons that could only be learned in the profound darkness of self-examination. Your apparent confidence in your own perceptions comes not from never being wrong, but from having been wrong so many times that you have learned to hold your opinions lightly, while still trusting your direct experience. Your peace with being misunderstood comes not from not caring about connection, but from having learned that true connection requires the risk of being authentically yourself, rather than the safety of being who others want you to be. The reversal shows you that what appears as aloofness is actually deep engagement with life at a level that goes beyond the surface dramas that capture most people's attention. You are not withdrawn from human experience, but immersed in its deeper currents, attuned to the archetypal patterns that play out through individual psychology, sensitive to the collective movements of consciousness and unconsciousness that shape cultural evolution. Your journey through enantiodromia teaches you that the goal of individuation is not to become someone special, but to become specifically yourself, to embody your unique configuration of universal human potentials with such authenticity that you become transparent to the deeper intelligence that works through all individual development. You become a clear channel for consciousness, rather than an obstacle to its flow. The quiet authority that others mistake for arrogance is actually the natural result of having established a genuine relationship with your own inner guidance. You have learned to distinguish between the voice of authentic intuition and the voice of internalized authority, between the wisdom of the integrated self and the strategies of the adapted ego. This discrimination allows you to move through the world with a certainty that is not brittle or defensive, but flexible and responsive to new information. In the completion of this reversal, you understand that your journey toward consciousness has made you not less human but more human, not separate from others, but more deeply connected to the universal patterns that govern all human experience. Your individuation serves not your ego's need for specialness, but the collective's need for examples of what becomes possible when someone has the courage to become fully themselves. In accepting this darkness fully, in learning to find meaning within meaninglessness and purpose within apparent purposelessness, you develop the psychological muscles that will allow you to serve as a bridge between consciousness and unconsciousness, between individual development and collective evolution, between the wisdom of solitude and the warmth of genuine human connection. The Nigurdo prepares you not for permanent withdrawal from the world, but for eventual return to it with a capacity for service that could not have developed through any other means. From the depths of your own darkness emerges the profound archetype of the wounded healer, the sacred figure who can guide others through the labyrinth of suffering, precisely because they have navigated its passages themselves. Your ability to see through pretense, to recognize the unconscious patterns that govern human behavior, to pierce the veils of collective illusion. These gifts were not bestowed upon you from some elevated realm of spiritual superiority. They were forged in the fires of your own psychological crucifixion, tempered in the darkness of your own night sea journey, earned through your willingness to face what others still flee. The wounded healer knows the landscape of human suffering from the inside out. Every defense mechanism you recognize in others, you have employed yourself. Every form of unconsciousness you perceive with such clarity, you have lived within and struggled to escape. Every pattern of self-deception you can now see through, you once inhabited so completely that it defined your reality. Your wisdom is not theoretical knowledge, but embodied understanding, the deep knowing that comes only from having been lost and finding your way home to yourself. This experiential knowledge creates a form of recognition that transcends sympathy or even empathy. When you encounter someone trapped in the same psychological patterns you once inhabited, you do not see them from the outside with pity or judgment. You see them from the inside with the intimate knowing of someone who has stood exactly where they stand, who has felt exactly what they feel, who has believed exactly what they believe about their circumstances and their limitations. The wounded healer's sight operates through resonance, rather than analysis. You recognize others' pain not by studying their behavior, but by feeling the echo of your own similar pain awakening in response to their presence. You understand their confusion not by analyzing their words, but by remembering your own journey through similar confusion. You perceive their potential for healing not by evaluating their current capacity, but by knowing intimately what becomes possible when someone has the courage to face their wounds directly, rather than spending their life energy trying to avoid them. This recognition creates a profound compassion that is free from the condescension that often accompanies helping relationships. You do not look down upon others' struggles from a position of having transcended such difficulties. Instead, you look across the landscape of human experience from a place of having traveled through similar territory and emerged with maps that might be useful for others making the same journey. Your clarity about others' unconscious patterns emerges not from judgment, but from hard-won familiarity. You can see through their defense mechanisms, because you once lived behind similar defenses. You can recognize their projections, because you have experienced the discomfort of having your own projections reflected back to you. You can perceive their resistance to growth, because you remember your own fierce attachment to familiar forms of suffering. The wounded healer understands that psychological wounds, when consciously engaged, become sources of wisdom rather than simply sources of pain. Your own journey through depression taught you to recognize the soul's call for deeper meaning beneath the mind's despair. Your experience with anxiety revealed the price of living disconnected from your authentic nature. Your encounters with rage showed you the power that emerges when boundaries are clearly established and maintained. These personal encounters with the full spectrum of human emotion have created within you what might be called an emotional vocabulary that others often lack. You can distinguish between different qualities of sadness: the sadness that comes from loss, the sadness that comes from betraying yourself, the sadness that comes from recognizing beauty, the sadness that comes from outgrowing relationships that once sustained you. This discrimination allows you to help others navigate their own emotional landscape with greater precision and less fear. The archetype of the wounded healer reveals that your ability to guide others comes not from having eliminated suffering from your own life, but from having developed a conscious relationship with suffering that transforms it from meaningless pain into meaningful initiation. You have learned that every wound carries within it the seed of a particular form of wisdom, that every form of brokenness can become a doorway to a specific kind of wholeness. Your own psychological wounds have become your credentials for this work, not healed wounds that you can display as trophies of your spiritual achievement, but living wounds that remain tender and responsive, that continue to teach you about the ongoing nature of the healing process. These wounds have not been cured but have been transformed into sources of sensitivity, compassion, and understanding that allow you to sense others' hidden pain and respond to it with appropriate care. The wounded healer knows that healing is not about fixing what is broken, but about learning to carry brokenness with grace, dignity, and purpose. You have discovered that your psychological scars are not evidence of your failure, but proof of your courage, evidence that you were willing to engage fully with life's difficulties rather than numbing yourself into comfortable unconsciousness. This understanding transforms your relationship to others' suffering. You no longer feel compelled to rush in with advice or solutions, because you know that healing happens at its own pace and according to its own logic. You have learned to trust the wisdom of the wound itself, the intelligence that guides the healing process from within, rather than being imposed from without. Your role becomes not to heal others, but to create space within which their own healing intelligence can operate more freely. The wounded healer's presence offers something that no amount of technique or training can provide: the living proof that it is possible to survive psychological dismemberment and emerge not bitter, but compassionate, not hardened but more open, not cynical but more wise. Your very existence becomes a form of medicine for others who are still in the depths of their own dark night, still convinced that their current suffering will never end, still believing that their wounds define their limitations rather than their potential. You learn to share your experience not as prescription but as possibility. Your story becomes not a template that others should follow but a demonstration that individual healing is possible, that consciousness can be developed, that the journey through psychological darkness can lead to authentic light, rather than spiritual bypassing or premature transcendence. The wounded healer understands that each person's path through their own darkness will be unique, shaped by their particular constellation of gifts and wounds, their specific life circumstances, their individual relationship to the archetypal energies that govern human development. Your role is not to provide the path, but to serve as a companion for portions of others' journeys, offering the guidance that comes from familiarity with the terrain, rather than directions that must be followed exactly. In carrying your wounds consciously, you discover that they become sources of strength rather than weakness, sources of connection rather than isolation. Your willingness to remain vulnerable, to acknowledge your ongoing process of healing, to admit the places where you are still learning, creates safety for others to reveal their own unfinished business. their own areas of struggle and growth. The wounded healer archetype reveals that true authority comes not from having completed the journey, but from being willing to remain authentically engaged with the process of becoming. Your credibility emerges not from your perfection, but from your willingness to continue learning, growing, and facing whatever new layers of unconsciousness emerge as your awareness deepens. You become a living bridge between the world of woundedness and the world of wholeness, demonstrating through your own integration that these are not separate worlds, but different aspects of the same reality. Your presence suggests to others that they need not choose between acknowledging their brokenness and claiming their power, between accepting their humanity and developing their potential, between honoring their past pain and creating their future possibility. The wounded healer knows that the deepest service to others' healing comes not from trying to fix their problems, but from maintaining faith in their capacity to transform their own suffering into wisdom. Your clarity about their unconscious patterns serves not as diagnosis, but as recognition, seeing in their current struggles the raw material from which their unique gifts will eventually emerge. In embodying this archetype fully, you discover that your wounds have become doorways rather than walls, openings through which love and understanding can flow, rather than barriers that separate you from others' experience. Your pain has been transformed into a form of medicine that you carry not as a burden but as a sacred trust, available to offer to others when their own healing journey calls for the particular wisdom that only your specific wounds could provide. The wounded healer stands at the threshold between suffering and transformation, holding space for others to make their own choice about which direction they wish to travel. Your presence does not guarantee others' healing, but it makes healing more possible by demonstrating that the journey from wound to wisdom is not only survivable, but can become the source of your greatest gifts to the world. In the ancient alchemical texts, the nigredo represents the first stage of the great work, the necessary dissolution, the dark putrefaction that precedes all transformation. It is the phase of decomposition where everything that once seemed solid and reliable breaks down into its constituent elements, where the carefully constructed identity dissolves into the primordial soup from which new life can emerge. For the soul who sees too clearly in a world committed to blindness, this nigredo manifests as a profound and seemingly endless isolation, not chosen but imposed by the very nature of their clarity. You find yourself dwelling in a country whose language you no longer speak, whose customs you can no longer follow with innocent participation. The social rituals that once provided comfort and belonging now feel like elaborate performances in a play whose meaning has become incomprehensible. You watch others engage with passionate intensity in dramas that seem to you like shadow puppet shows, significant to the participants, but clearly projections of inner conflicts rather than responses to actual external realities. This isolation is not the temporary loneliness that comes from being between communities or relationships. It is the existential alienation of someone who has awakened from a collective dream and discovered that they cannot return to sleep. You are like Rip Van Winkle in reverse. While you slept the sleep of unconsciousness, you belonged to the world around you, but now that you have awakened, you find that the world itself seems to be sleeping a sleep so deep that your attempts to communicate across the divide feel like calling into an abyss. The nigredo of isolation reveals the true cost of consciousness. It is not the price you pay for being superior to others, but the price you pay for being authentic to yourself. Every step toward greater self-knowledge, every integration of shadow material, every moment of refusing to participate in collective self-deception carries you further from the unconscious community and deeper into the solitary territory of individual becoming. In this darkness, you encounter what might be called the Saturn phase of psychological development, the time of necessary restriction, limitation, and apparent barrenness that precedes new growth. Like the mythical Atlas, you find yourself carrying the weight of seeing what others cannot see, knowing what others do not want to know, bearing witness to truths that others find too heavy to lift. This weight is not punishment, but preparation, the strengthening that comes from carrying consciousness in a world that prefers the lightness of unconsciousness. The isolation teaches you to distinguish between the loneliness of being misunderstood and the aloneness of being uniquely yourself. Loneliness carries the ache of separation, the grief of disconnection from others. But aloneness, you discover, can be a form of profound connection with the deeper currents of existence that are often drowned out by the noise of social engagement, connection with the archetypal energies that flow through individual experience, connection with the timeless wisdom that speaks through silence rather than words. In the depths of this Negredo, you are forced to confront the spiritual materialism that may have unconsciously motivated your journey toward consciousness. Did you seek awakening in order to feel superior to others? Did you pursue self-knowledge as another form of achievement? Did you develop your clarity as a way of avoiding the messy uncertainty of genuine human vulnerability? The darkness strips away these hidden motivations, leaving you face to face with the question of why consciousness matters if it leads only to isolation and misunderstanding. This confrontation with your own unconscious motivations for seeking consciousness is perhaps the most difficult aspect of the Negredo. It requires you to acknowledge that even your spiritual development may have been contaminated by ego's need for specialness, that your journey toward authenticity may have been another elaborate escape from the ordinary demands of human relationship, that your clarity may have become another form of armor against the vulnerability that genuine intimacy requires. The dissolution continues as you recognize how your psychological insights, however accurate, can become a form of intellectual defense against feeling the full impact of emotional experience. You see how your understanding of others' unconscious patterns can protect you from having to risk genuine encounter with their complexity. You realize how your wisdom about human nature can become a substitute for the direct, uncertain, messy experience of simply being human alongside other humans. In this darkness, you lose not only your connection to unconscious community, but also your attachment to conscious superiority. The Negredo burns away the subtle pride that comes from being the one who sees, the hidden satisfaction that can accompany being misunderstood by lesser minds, the unconscious sense of specialness that can grow from being alienated from the collective. You are left with nothing but your own naked existence, stripped of both unconscious belonging and conscious distinction. This stripping away reveals the bedrock of authentic being, not the being that defines itself in relationship to others, whether through conformity or rebellion, but the being that exists independent of all external validation or rejection. In the depths of isolation, you discover aspects of yourself that can only emerge in the absence of social reflection, qualities that exist purely for their own sake, rather than for their effect upon others. The Negredo teaches you that consciousness without community is incomplete, but community without consciousness is hollow. You long for genuine meeting with others, but you can no longer pretend that surface-level interaction constitutes real relationship. You hunger for authentic connection, but you refuse to sacrifice your hard-won authenticity for the false comfort of unconscious belonging. This creates a tension that seems impossible to resolve: the need for others, and the inability to find others who can meet you at your current level of development. In this seeming impossibility, you learn what the mystics have called the dark night of the soul, the time when all external sources of meaning and purpose fall away, leaving you alone with the essential question of existence itself. Why be conscious if consciousness leads to isolation? Why develop authenticity if authenticity prevents belonging? Why see clearly if clear sight creates unbearable loneliness? The darkness provides no easy answers to these questions. Instead, it asks you to find meaning in meaninglessness, purpose in purposelessness, connection in disconnection. It demands that you develop the capacity to love truth for its own sake, rather than for what it provides in terms of comfort, understanding, or belonging. It requires you to find satisfaction in consciousness itself, rather than in consciousness's recognition or appreciation by others. This is the ultimate test of your commitment to authenticity. Can you remain true to yourself, even when that truth leads to complete social isolation? Can you continue to see clearly, even when clear sight brings nothing but loneliness? Can you maintain your integrity, even when integrity costs you every relationship that once provided meaning and connection? The Nigrido strips away everything that is not essential, everything that depends upon external validation or support. You are reduced to the irreducible core of your being, not the self that exists in relationship to others, but the self that exists in relationship to existence itself. This reduction is both terrifying and liberating, both death and birth, both ending and beginning. In the depths of this dissolution, you encounter what Jung called the transcendent function, the psyche's capacity to create new solutions from the tension between opposites. Your isolation begins to generate its own form of connection. Your alienation from unconscious community creates space for conscious solitude. Your separation from false relationships opens the possibility for authentic encounter with your own essential nature. The Nigrido reveals that you are not actually alone. You are accompanied by the vast intelligence of the unconscious, by the archetypal energies that flow through all human experience, by the eternal patterns that connect your individual journey to the larger evolution of consciousness. Your isolation is not abandonment but incubation, not punishment but preparation for a new form of being that can bridge the apparent gap between individual development and communal belonging. Like the seed that must decompose in dark earth before it can sprout toward light, you are undergoing the necessary dissolution that precedes transformation. The person you once were, someone who could find meaning through unconscious participation in collective life, is dying. But this death is not defeat. It is the death that precedes rebirth, the dissolution that makes possible a new form of existence that can honor both individual authenticity and genuine community. In the depths of the Nigrido, you learn to find companionship in the eternal rather than the temporal, in the archetypal rather than the personal, in the universal patterns of human experience, rather than in specific individuals who may or may not be capable of conscious relationship. You discover that you are part of a vast communion of souls who have undertaken this journey through isolation toward integration, though most of them are separated from you by centuries rather than geography. The darkness teaches you that isolation can be a form of service, that by refusing to participate in unconscious community, you create space for the possibility of conscious community. By declining to enable others' unconsciousness, you preserve the potential for genuine meeting. By accepting the loneliness of authenticity, you protect the flame of consciousness that may someday illuminate not just your own path, but pathways for others who are ready to leave the familiar darkness of collective unconsciousness. The Nigrido is not permanent, though while you are in it, it feels eternal. It is a phase in the larger process of individuation, the necessary dark passage that connects the dissolution of your old identity with the birth of your new capacity for conscious relationship. You are not becoming permanently isolated. You are becoming prepared for a form of connection that can honor both individual development and genuine community, both personal authenticity and collective healing. In accepting this darkness fully, in learning to find meaning within meaninglessness and purpose within apparent purposelessness, you develop the psychological muscles that will allow you to serve as a bridge between consciousness and unconsciousness, between individual development and collective evolution, between the wisdom of solitude and the warmth of genuine human connection. The Nigrido prepares you not for permanent withdrawal from the world, but for eventual return to it with a capacity for service that could not have developed through any other means. The world is a vast theatre where every soul performs their unconscious drama upon the stage of daily existence, each actor believing themselves to be living authentic life while following scripts written in the depths of their unexamined psyche. You have learned to see through this magnificent performance, to recognize the elaborate choreography of personas and projections that creates what we call human relationship. And in this seeing you have become both audience and fellow performer, watching the dance of masks while learning when to join the movement and when to step away from the stage entirely. The theater of human interaction operates according to rules that most participants follow without conscious awareness. There are unspoken agreements about which emotions are acceptable to express and which must be hidden, about what topics can be discussed openly and which must remain in the shadows, about how much authenticity any relationship can bear before it becomes too threatening to the personas involved. These agreements create a kind of collective trance, a shared hypnosis that allows people to interact without ever truly meeting one another. You see how each person has developed their particular role in this unconscious drama. The perpetual victim who unconsciously seeks situations that will confirm their powerlessness. The rescuer who needs others to remain helpless in order to feel valuable. The persecutor who projects their own self-hatred onto others and then attacks what they see there. These roles shift and change in an endless dance, with people moving from victim to rescuer to persecutor depending on what their unconscious needs require in any given moment. But your sight penetrates deeper than these surface roles to see the wounded child that lies beneath each performance. You recognize that every persona is an elaborate construction designed to protect some essential vulnerability, some core wound that the psyche believes would be unbearable if exposed. The aggressive person is often defending against feelings of powerlessness. The withdrawn individual may be protecting against the terror of rejection. The people pleaser could be guarding against the devastating possibility of abandonment. This recognition fills you with a profound compassion that coexists paradoxically with an equally profound weariness. You understand why people need their masks, but you also see how these masks prevent the very intimacy and connection that the soul most deeply craves. You witness the tragic irony of human relationship, that our strategies for protecting ourselves from hurt often create exactly the disconnection and misunderstanding that wounds us most deeply. The dance of masks becomes particularly complex when you realize that your own clarity often triggers others' unconscious material. Your peace with authenticity can activate others' shame about their own pretense. Your comfort with your shadow can illuminate others' repressed darkness. Your integration of opposing qualities can destabilize others' carefully maintained psychological divisions. Simply by being yourself, you can unknowingly become a destabilizing force in others' carefully constructed reality. You learn to navigate this minefield with increasing skill, developing what might be called emotional sonar, the ability to sense others' psychological state and adjust your level of authenticity accordingly, not because you want to manipulate or control, but because you recognize that consciousness is most effectively transmitted through relationship, and relationship requires sensitivity to others' capacity to receive what you have to offer. This navigation teaches you the difference between authentic adaptation and inauthentic performance. Authentic adaptation involves adjusting your expression of truth to meet others where they are, speaking their language without abandoning your own inner knowing. Inauthentic performance, by contrast, involves betraying your own truth in order to maintain others' comfort, pretending to be unconscious in order to avoid triggering their defensiveness. The mastery of this distinction allows you to participate in the dance of masks without becoming lost in it. You can engage with others' personas while maintaining contact with your own authentic self. You can appreciate the creativity and ingenuity of psychological defenses while not being fooled by their surface presentations. You can join the performance when it serves connection and step away when it demands the sacrifice of your integrity. In the theater of interaction, you begin to recognize the deeper longings that drive even the most elaborate performances. Beneath the mask of superiority lies the desperate need to feel valuable. Behind the pretense of indifference hides the terror of being found unlovable. Under the performance of strength dwells the exhaustion of carrying burdens that were never meant to be borne alone. Your awakened sight sees through the costume to the soul that wears it, and your heart breaks open with recognition of the universal human struggle to be seen, known, and loved for who we really are. This recognition transforms your relationship to others' unconscious behaviors. Instead of feeling frustrated by their inability to see clearly, you develop appreciation for the tremendous creativity and energy they invest in their psychological survival strategies. You understand that their personas are not evidence of dishonesty, but of adaptability, not signs of weakness, but of the human capacity to respond to impossible circumstances with ingenious solutions. The dance teaches you that everyone is healing from something, even when their healing strategies appear destructive or counterproductive. The workaholic is healing from feelings of worthlessness through achievement. The perfectionist is healing from shame through control. The rebel is healing from powerlessness through opposition. Your role becomes not to judge these healing strategies, but to see through them to the wounded wholeness they are attempting to restore. You learn to recognize when someone is genuinely available for deeper contact and when they are too defended to risk authentic encounter. This recognition allows you to offer your authentic presence as an invitation rather than an invasion, creating space for real meeting while respecting others' need for protection when they are not ready for exposure. The theater reveals that most human conflict arises not from genuine differences, but from the collision of unconscious projections. People fight not about what is actually happening, but about what past wounds are being activated in present circumstances. They argue not with each other, but with the internalized voices of parents, teachers, and authority figures from their past. They defend not against actual threats, but against the ghostly repetition of old hurts that their unconscious expects to encounter again. Your clear sight allows you to see through the content of conflicts, to the process beneath the deeper dynamics of projection, transference, and unconscious repetition that create the appearance of interpersonal difficulty, while actually representing intrapsychic healing attempts. This perspective transforms you from a participant in drama to a witness of the psyche's attempt to resolve its own contradictions through relationship. The dance of masks shows you that authentic intimacy requires the gradual, mutual lowering of defenses, rather than their sudden abandonment. True relationship develops through the slow building of trust, the careful testing of whether it is safe to show more vulnerable aspects of oneself, the gradual discovery that someone can see your humanity without being frightened away by its complexity. You develop the patience to allow this process to unfold naturally. Rather than trying to force premature authenticity, you learn to meet others at whatever level of realness they can currently sustain, offering just enough truth to create possibility for greater depth. without overwhelming their capacity to receive it. This becomes a form of psychological artistry, the skillful means of supporting others' movement toward greater consciousness, without pushing them beyond their current ability to integrate new awareness. In mastering the dance of masks, you discover that the goal is not to eliminate personas entirely, but to develop a conscious relationship with the roles you play. The persona serves important functions. It allows you to participate in social situations that require certain behaviors, to protect vulnerable aspects of yourself until you feel safe enough to reveal them, to experiment with different expressions of your nature without committing your entire identity to any single manifestation. The awakened dancer learns to wear masks consciously rather than being worn by them. Unconsciously, you can play various roles without losing contact with your essential self, can adapt to different social contexts without abandoning your core integrity, can engage with others' personas without becoming trapped in persona-level interaction yourself. This mastery creates a new form of freedom, the freedom to participate fully in human experience, while maintaining the inner observer that can step back from any performance when it no longer serves authentic connection. You become like a skilled actor who can fully embody a character while never forgetting their own identity, who can give themselves completely to the role while remaining available to improvise when the script no longer fits the reality of the moment. The dance of masks ultimately reveals that all personas are attempts to express something true about the soul that wears them, even when that expression has become distorted by fear, trauma, or social conditioning. Your compassionate sight learns to see through the distortion to the authentic impulse beneath the real need for recognition, love, safety, or power that the persona is attempting to meet, however ineffectively. In this seeing, judgment transforms into curiosity. Instead of asking why are they being so fake, you learn to ask what truth are they trying to express through this particular mask? What wound are they trying to heal through this performance? What essential need are they attempting to meet through this elaborate construction? These questions open doorways to understanding rather than building walls of separation. The dance continues, but your participation in it becomes increasingly conscious and compassionate. You learn to honor both the mask and the face beneath it, to appreciate both the performance and the performer, to engage with both the role and the soul that plays it. In this integration, you discover that the dance of masks is not an obstacle to authentic relationship, but one of the primary vehicles through which consciousness explores its own infinite creativity and seeks ever deeper forms of recognition and love. In the mists of ancient time at the sacred site of Delphi, the oracle sat above the chasm where Apollo's sacred vapors rose from the earth's deep belly. She breathed these vapors of divine madness and spoke truths that kings and peasants alike traveled vast distances to hear, truths that often shattered their comfortable illusions and sent them away troubled rather than consoled. The oracle did not choose her burden, it chose her. The gift of seeing beyond the veil of present circumstances into the deeper patterns that govern human destiny was both blessing and curse, honor and exile. You have become a modern oracle, though no pilgrims journey to your door seeking wisdom. Instead, the unwanted knowledge finds you in the quiet moments between heartbeats, in the space between others' words where their real meaning dwells, in the pregnant silence that follows, when someone speaks their carefully constructed truth, and you hear the deeper truth they are unconsciously revealing. You see the patterns that weave through human experience, like golden threads through dark fabric, the ways that childhood wounds continue to direct adult choices, how unconscious beliefs shape perception so completely that people literally live in different realities while occupying the same physical space. This sight comes unbidden, like prophecy or revelation. You cannot turn it off any more than you can stop your heart from beating or your lungs from breathing. It operates through you rather than being operated by you, a function of consciousness itself, rather than a skill you have developed. And with this sight comes the oracle's burden, a weight of knowing things that others cannot yet see, understanding patterns that they cannot yet recognize, perceiving consequences that they cannot yet imagine. The burden manifests first as a peculiar form of loneliness, not the loneliness of being disliked, but the loneliness of living in a different temporal reality than those around you. While others are absorbed in the immediate drama of current circumstances, you see the larger story of which these circumstances are only the latest chapter. While they are reacting to surface events, you perceive the deeper currents that are actually directing the flow of experience. You watch people repeat the same patterns over and over, each time convinced that this time will be different, unable to see that their approach to the situation contains the seeds of its own repetition. You witness relationships cycling through the same conflicts because neither party can recognize the unconscious projections and expectations that create the friction. You observe institutions and communities making the same mistakes their predecessors made because they cannot see the psychological patterns that transcend individual personalities and repeat themselves through different actors across generations. This temporal displacement creates a profound sense of isolation. You feel like someone who has seen the end of a movie trying to explain the plot twists to viewers who are still absorbed in the opening scenes. Your attempts to share what you see are often met with resistance, denial, or accusations of negativity because others cannot yet perceive the patterns you have learned to recognize. The oracle's knowledge is rarely welcome because it disrupts the comfortable illusions that people use to navigate their daily lives. They prefer the fantasy that they are in control of their circumstances to the reality that they are unconsciously participating in patterns much larger than their individual will. They choose the belief that their problems are external and therefore solvable through external means, rather than recognizing that their difficulties often stem from internal contradictions and unconscious conflicts that require inner work to resolve. Your seeing becomes particularly unwelcome when it reveals the ways that people are unconsciously creating the very circumstances they consciously complain about. The person who claims to want love but unconsciously pushes others away through testing behaviors. The individual who says they desire success but sabotages their efforts through perfectionism or procrastination. The community that speaks of unity while unconsciously maintaining the divisions that keep them from having to do the difficult work of genuine reconciliation. The oracle learns that truth-telling is a form of involuntary service to consciousness, regardless of whether that service is recognized or appreciated. You speak not because you want to be right or to prove your superiority, but because silence in the face of clearly perceived truth feels like a betrayal of your deepest nature. You have become an instrument through which consciousness seeks to know itself more clearly, and that instrument must remain true to its function even when, especially when its music falls upon deaf ears. This burden teaches you the difference between prophecy and prediction. Prediction attempts to control future outcomes through knowing what will happen. Prophecy, by contrast, reveals the timeless patterns that are always available to unfold, depending on the level of consciousness brought to bear upon present circumstances. You do not see the future. You see the archetypal possibilities that lie dormant in every present moment, waiting to be activated by conscious choice or unconscious compulsion. The oracle's sight reveals that most human suffering comes not from external circumstances but from the unconscious resistance to what those circumstances are trying to teach. You see people fighting against experiences that could become gateways to greater wisdom if approached with curiosity rather than resistance. You witness the ways that our culture's emphasis on comfort and pleasure prevents the kind of voluntary suffering that leads to psychological growth and spiritual development. This perception brings with it a profound compassion mixed with frustration. You want to spare others the unnecessary suffering that comes from remaining unconscious, but you understand that consciousness cannot be given as a gift. It must be earned through direct experience. You watch people choosing familiar misery over unfamiliar possibility, clinging to problems they have learned to solve rather than risking the unknown territory of authentic transformation. The burden deepens when you realize that your very presence often accelerates others' confrontation with their own unconsciousness. Like a catalyst in a chemical reaction, your integrated consciousness speeds up the process by which others' shadow material surfaces for potential integration. This acceleration can be uncomfortable for all involved. They experience increased pressure to become conscious, while you witness their resistance and sometimes their projection of responsibility for their discomfort onto you. You learn that the oracle's knowledge comes with the responsibility of appropriate timing. Not all truths are ready to be spoken. Not all insights are prepared to be received. Not all patterns are ripe for conscious recognition. Part of your development involves learning to sense when someone is genuinely asking for deeper understanding and when they are simply seeking validation for their existing beliefs and behaviors. This discernment teaches you the art of strategic silence, knowing when to speak and when to hold your tongue, when to illuminate and when to allow others to remain in the darkness they currently need. You develop the patience of geological time, understanding that consciousness evolves at its own pace and cannot be forced or rushed without causing more harm than benefit. The oracle's burden also includes the responsibility of remaining open to your own continued learning. The patterns you see so clearly in others' lives continue to operate in subtle forms within your own experience. Your sight, however clear, remains partial. Your understanding, however deep, continues to evolve. The humility that comes from this recognition keeps you from the spiritual pride that would close off further growth. In the depths of this burden, you discover that the oracle's true service is not to provide answers, but to ask better questions. Your role is not to tell others what they should do, but to reflect back to them the deeper questions their situations are asking them to explore. You become skilled at helping others discover their own wisdom rather than imposing your insights upon their circumstances. The unwanted knowledge teaches you that consciousness is not about having the right information, but about developing the right relationship to uncertainty. The oracle does not know the future, she knows the eternal, the archetypal patterns that repeat themselves endlessly through human experience, the timeless dynamics that play out through the temporary forms of individual circumstances. Your burden lightens when you realize that you are not responsible for others' readiness to receive truth, only for your own faithfulness to consciousness as it seeks to express itself through your individual awareness. You learn to carry your knowledge like a candle in the wind, protecting its flame, not by hiding it from the world, but by understanding the conditions under which it can burn most brightly and serve most effectively. The oracle's gift transforms from burden to blessing when you understand that unwanted knowledge is still sacred knowledge, that truths which are rejected in one moment may be desperately needed in the next, that your function is to remain available to consciousness, rather than to control its timing or reception in others' lives. In accepting the oracle's burden fully, you discover that it is not actually a burden at all. It is a form of participation in the larger intelligence that guides human evolution toward greater consciousness. You become a neuron in the awakening mind of humanity, sensing and responding to patterns that serve the whole, even when the individual parts cannot yet perceive their large array of. The unwanted knowledge becomes a treasure that you guard not possessively but protectively. keeping it available for those moments when consciousness calls for deeper seeing, when someone is genuinely ready to move beyond their current level of awareness, when the time has come for truth to emerge from the shadows where it has been waiting. There comes a moment in the deepest descent when the soul, having touched the very floor of its own unmaking, begins to sense something stirring beneath the ash. It is not hope. Hope is too fragile a thing for this realm. It is not resurrection in the way the mind imagines resurrection, as a return to what was. No, this is something entirely other, something that can only be born from the complete acceptance of what has been lost, what has been seen, what can never again be unseen. You who have walked the path of unwanted knowing, you who have carried the terrible gift of seeing through the veils that others need to survive, you know this moment. It arrives not with fanfare, but with the quietest recognition, like the first breath after nearly drowning, the recognition that you have not died from the weight of truth, that somehow, impossibly, you remain. But what remains is not what you were. The person who first began to see, who first felt the ground of comfortable illusion shifting beneath their feet, that person has been consumed entirely. What emerges from this consumption is not a return but a becoming, the birth of something that has never existed before in quite this way. This is the phoenix moment, but not the phoenix of mythology with its dramatic flames and spectacular rebirth. This is the phoenix of the psyche, rising not from external fire, but from the internal combustion of truth, meeting resistance, of clarity encountering the world's need for obscurity, of authentic sight colliding with collective blindness, until something entirely new is forged in that collision. The ashes from which you rise are not merely the remnants of who you used to be. They are the accumulated debris of every comfortable lie you once told yourself, every false persona you wore to belong, every time you dimmed your inner light to avoid casting shadows that others would have to confront. They are the ashes of the part of you that believed love meant never disturbing another's peace, that wisdom meant keeping dangerous truths to yourself, that grace meant contorting yourself into shapes that fit other people's comfort zones. But ashes, Jung knew, are not endings. They are the rich soil from which new forms of life emerge. What has been burned away was not your essence, but everything that obscured your essence. What has been consumed was not your truth, but everything that prevented your truth from finding its authentic expression. The fire that seemed so destructive was actually the flame of individuation, burning away everything that was not truly you. In this rising, you discover something the mythologies never quite capture. The phoenix does not return to its original form. It does not become again what it was before the burning. Instead, it becomes what it was always meant to be, but could never become without first passing through the flames of its own dissolution. This is the paradox of psychological death and rebirth. We do not recover what we were, we discover what we are. The new form that emerges carries within it all the wisdom gained from the descent, but it carries this wisdom differently now. Where once the burden of seeing felt like a weight that might crush you, now it becomes integrated into the very structure of your being, like a bird whose hollow bones make flight possible rather than making the bird fragile. The weight becomes lightness through acceptance, through integration, through the mysterious alchemy that transforms burden into gift. This transformation does not happen overnight, nor does it happen once and remain complete forever. It is a process of becoming, a continuous emergence that unfolds as you learn to inhabit this new form of being. Like the phoenix learning to use its wings, you must discover how to move through the world with this integrated clarity, how to be authentic without being harsh, how to see truly without becoming blinded by your own sight. The gift you carry is no longer the raw, unprocessed knowing that once felt so isolating. It has been refined through the fire of your own resistance, tempered through the heat of your own struggle to accept it, mellowed through the deep internal work of integrating shadow and light. What emerges is not the sharp-edged clarity that cuts through illusion like a blade, but a luminous presence that illuminates truth without destroying the capacity of others to discover it in their own time. This is perhaps the most crucial aspect of the Phoenix Rising. You learn to hold space for both your own knowing and others' need for their protective illusions. This is not compromise or dimming of your light. It is the flowering of wisdom into compassion. You begin to understand that truth revealed too quickly or harshly can be more destructive than healing. That sometimes the kindest thing you can do is allow others their necessary mysteries, while still remaining true to your own clarity. The phoenix learns to fly, not by abandoning the ground, but by understanding both earth and sky. Similarly, you learn to live with integrated awareness, not by rejecting the ordinary world, but by finding ways to move within it, that honor both the depth of your seeing and the reality of others' different positions on their own journeys. This is the dance of the awakened soul, present to truth, but not imprisoned by it, clear-sighted but not cold-hearted, authentic but not inflexible. In this new form of being, you discover that the very qualities that once made you feel alien in the world become the source of your greatest gifts to it. Your capacity to see through surface appearances becomes a healing presence for those ready to look deeper. Your comfort with paradox and ambiguity becomes a refuge for souls trapped in the tyranny of either-or thinking. Your willingness to sit with difficult truths becomes an invitation for others to stop running from their own. But this gifting happens naturally, organically, without force or agenda. The phoenix does not announce its rising, it simply embodies its new nature. Similarly, your transformed presence becomes its own teaching, your integrated being becomes its own gift to the world. You no longer feel the need to convince anyone of what you see or pressure anyone to wake up according to your timeline. The urgency that once drove you to share your insights has transformed into a patient presence that creates space for others to have their own revelations. This is the emergence of what Jung called the integrated personality, not the ego trying to be spiritual, not the persona trying to appear wise, but the authentic self that has learned to embody its truth with grace. It is a form of being that transcends the old dualities of hidden or revealed, authentic or acceptable, true or kind. In the phoenix, these apparent opposites find their synthesis. The loneliness that once accompanied your seeing begins to transform as well, not because you find others who see exactly as you do. That kind of belonging may or may not come, but because you no longer need external validation to know the truth of your own experience. The phoenix flies alone not from isolation but from integration. It has found its home within itself and can therefore be at home anywhere. This internal homecoming changes everything about how you relate to the world. Where once you might have felt like a stranger visiting an alien planet, now you feel like a native of a larger reality that encompasses but transcends the everyday world. You can participate fully in ordinary human life while never forgetting the deeper currents that run beneath the surface. You can engage with the collective dream while remaining awake within it. The phoenix rising is also the moment when you understand that your journey through the fire was never just about you. Every soul that learns to transform the burden of knowing into the gift of presence makes it slightly easier for the next soul to do the same. Your willingness to burn and be reborn strengthens the invisible web that connects all beings in their shared journey toward greater consciousness. This is why the phoenix becomes a symbol, not just of individual transformation, but of collective hope. Each time a soul rises from the ashes of its own dissolution, it adds to the light available to all souls. Each time someone learns to carry their clarity with grace rather than grief, they make it possible for others to see that such grace is achievable. In rising from the ashes of who you used to be, you discover that you were never meant to be a perfect copy of anyone else's truth. You were meant to be an original expression of life's desire to know itself more fully, to see itself more clearly, to love itself more completely. The fire that seemed so destructive was actually life's way of burning away everything that prevented this authentic expression from emerging. The phoenix does not rise despite the burning, it rises because of the burning. Similarly, you do not become integrated despite the pain of seeing clearly. You become integrated because that pain was the labor of your own birth into wholeness. Every moment of feeling alien, every experience of lonely knowing, every struggle to remain authentic in an inauthentic world, all of it was the fire in which your true nature was being forged. Now in this rising you understand that the gift was never meant to be hidden, but it was also never meant to be forced upon the world. Like the phoenix's song, which is said to be the most beautiful music in creation, your authentic presence becomes a natural blessing that touches others without effort or intention. You no longer carry your truth like a burden or brandish it like a weapon. You wear it like wings as the natural equipment for the flight that is your life. This is the paradox of the phoenix rising. In becoming fully yourself, you become more available to others. In accepting the lonely nature of your seeing, you become less alone. In stop trying to make others understand, you become more truly understood, not by everyone, perhaps not even by many, but by those souls who recognize in your integrated presence the possibility of their own wholeness. The world needs phoenixes, souls who have learned to transform the fire of truth into the light of wisdom, who have discovered how to be authentic without being destructive, who have found ways to see clearly without losing heart. The world needs those who can carry their insights with grace, who can be present to reality without being crushed by it, who can offer their gifts without attachment to how those gifts are received. In your rising, you become one of these needed souls, not perfect, not complete. The phoenix is not about reaching a final destination, but about learning to fly with whatever wings you have, whatever form your truth has taken. You learn to trust the process of your own becoming, to honor the fire that forged you, to celebrate the ash from which you emerged. The phoenix rising is not a single moment, but a way of being, a continuous emerging, a perpetual becoming, a constant dance between dissolution and integration. Each day offers new opportunities to practice this art of authentic presence, new chances to transform burden into blessing, new invitations to embody your truth with ever greater grace. And in this practice, in this embodiment, in this continuous rising, you discover the ultimate truth. You are never broken and in need of fixing. You are a seed that needed the fire of your own resistance to crack open, a potential that needed the pressure of your own contradictions to actualize, a song that needed the silence of your own dissolution to find its voice. The phoenix you have become is not a better version of who you were. It is the revelation of who you have always been beneath the layers of conditioning, beneath the weight of others' expectations, beneath the fog of collective dreaming. In rising from your own ashes, you do not transcend your humanity. You finally, fully, authentically inhabit it. In the deepest chambers of psychological transformation, there emerges a figure that the ancient wisdom traditions have always recognized, but rarely named directly. The guardian of thresholds, not the fierce sentinel who bars passage, but the gentle keeper of doorways, who understands that every soul must choose its own moment of crossing from one state of consciousness to another. This is what you become when your own burning and rising have taught you the sacred art of presence without pressure, availability without agenda, To be a guardian of thresholds is to have learned the most delicate dance in all of human relating, how to embody your truth so completely that it becomes an invitation rather than an imposition, a lighthouse whose beam illuminates the darkness for those ready to navigate by its light, while never demanding that anyone abandon their current course to follow yours. This is mastery not over others, but over the impulse to make others see what you see, understand what you understand, wake up according to your timeline rather than their own. The threshold guardian emerges only after the soul has passed through every other stage of its awakening. The initial shock of seeing clearly, the period of urgent evangelism, the dark night of being misunderstood, the temptation toward cynicism, the phoenix rising of integration. Each of these stages teaches essential lessons, but the final stage teaches perhaps the most crucial one, that wisdom shared too eagerly becomes dogma, that truth forced upon the unwilling becomes violence, that light shone too brightly into unprepared eyes causes not awakening but blindness. This is the paradox that Jung understood so deeply in his own work with individuals, standing at the crossroads of consciousness. Those who most need the medicine of clear seeing are often those most resistant to it, not because they are stubborn or foolish, but because they are not yet prepared for the responsibility that clarity brings. The guardian learns to honor this resistance, to see it not as an obstacle to overcome, but as a natural protection that will dissolve when the soul is ready to inhabit a larger reality. Standing at the threshold between the unconscious and conscious realms, between the world of comfortable illusions and uncomfortable truths, the guardian develops what might be called sacred patience, not the passive waiting of resignation, but the active presence of someone who knows that timing is everything in matters of the soul, like a skilled midwife who knows when to intervene and when to trust the natural process of birth. The threshold guardian learns to sense when a soul is truly ready to cross from one state of being to another. This sensing is not intellectual but felt, not analyzed but intuited. It comes from having made the crossing yourself so many times, in so many different ways, that you recognize the signs of readiness in others, the way their questions begin to change, the way their certainties start to wobble, the way they begin to look around their familiar world with new eyes as if seeing it for the first time. The guardian learns to recognize these subtle signals and respond to them with offerings rather than pronouncements, with questions rather than answers, with presence rather than prescriptions. The art of guarding thresholds requires a fundamental shift in how you understand your role in others' awakening. Where once you might have felt responsible for opening their eyes, now you understand that your responsibility is to keep your own eyes clear and your own presence authentic. Where once you might have felt called to convince or convert, now you recognize that your calling is to simply be, to embody the possibility of integrated awareness, so naturally that others can sense it without being overwhelmed by it. This embodiment becomes its own teaching, but teaching of the most subtle kind. The guardian does not lecture about the nature of reality. They demonstrate through their way of being what it looks like to live with clear sight and an open heart. They do not argue against illusions. They simply offer the alternative of authentic presence. They do not tear down others' protective barriers. They model what it looks like to live without needing such barriers while still honoring their necessity in others. In becoming a guardian of thresholds, you discover that the greatest gift you can offer another soul is not your insights but your attention, not your conclusions but your curiosity, not your answers but your willingness to sit with questions together. The guardian has learned that people do not wake up because someone tells them to, but because they feel safe enough in someone's presence to let down their guard, to explore their own edges, to peek behind their own veils. This safety is created not through false reassurance or spiritual bypassing, but through your own comfort with uncertainty, your own ease with paradox, your own willingness to not know. The guardian who has made peace with mystery becomes a refuge for others who are beginning to question their certainties. Your comfort with the unknown gives others permission to release their grip on the known. The threshold you guard is not a physical place, but a psychological space, the liminal realm where old identities dissolve and new ones are born, where familiar worldviews crumble and expanded awareness emerges, where the ego's control gives way to the self's wisdom. This is tender territory, vulnerable ground that requires the most careful tending. Too much pressure and the soul retreats back into familiar defenses. Too little presence, and the moment of possibility passes unrecognized. Learning to inhabit this delicate balance is perhaps the most sophisticated skill in all of depth psychology. It requires you to be simultaneously engaged and detached, present and spacious, caring and non-attached. You must care enough to show up fully while caring so little about outcomes that your presence remains free of agenda. You must love the person before you enough to want their highest good, while loving them enough to let that good unfold in ways you cannot predict or control. This is the guardian's paradox. To be of maximum service, you must have no investment in being helpful. To offer your greatest gifts, you must be willing for those gifts to be unrecognized or refused. To be truly available for others' transformation, you must be so secure in your own that nothing they do or don't do can disturb your equilibrium. Such security is not indifference. It is the deepest form of respect. It honors others' sovereignty over their own consciousness, their right to move at their own pace, their wisdom in knowing when they are ready for what level of truth. The guardian trusts that each soul has its own inner guidance system, its own perfect timing, its own unique way of coming to whatever understanding it needs. This trust transforms how you hold space for others' struggles. Instead of trying to rescue them from their confusion, you recognize confusion as a necessary stage in the process of awakening. Instead of rushing to resolve their contradictions, you understand that contradictions are the creative tension from which new awareness is born. Instead of trying to spare them their dark nights of the soul, you know that such darkness is often the only thing powerful enough to crack open a shell that has grown too small. The guardian learns to love people through their resistance rather than despite it, to see their defenses as former allies that once served important purposes, to honor their fear as a natural response to the ego's sensing that its world is about to change in fundamental ways. This compassionate understanding creates the kind of holding environment in which authentic transformation can occur, not forced or rushed, but emerging organically from its own inner necessity. In mastering the art of threshold guardianship, you discover that the same qualities that once made your awakening so isolating now become your greatest assets in serving others' awakening. Your comfort with being misunderstood makes you safe for others to risk being misunderstood themselves. Your acceptance of your own shadow makes it safe for others to acknowledge theirs. Your integration of paradox creates space for others to stop trying to resolve every contradiction in their experience. But perhaps most importantly, your own journey through the fire of transformation gives you unshakable confidence in the process itself. You know from direct experience that consciousness has its own intelligence, its own momentum, its own ways of moving through apparent obstacles. This knowing allows you to trust the process even when, especially when it doesn't look like progress to the ordinary mind. The guardian becomes a living testament to the possibility of navigating the awakening process without losing your humanity, without becoming cold or detached, without developing spiritual superiority or psychological inflation. In you, others can see that it is possible to see clearly and remain warm-hearted, to understand deeply and stay humble, to be awake and still be approachable. This modeling happens not through trying to be an example, but through the natural overflow of an integrated life. The guardian has stopped trying to be anything other than exactly what they are, a human being who has learned to be comfortable with the full spectrum of human experience, who has found ways to embrace both light and shadow, who has discovered that enlightenment is not about transcending the human condition, but about inhabiting it more fully. In this authentic inhabiting of your own nature, you become what Jung called a wounded healer, someone whose own integration of woundedness and healing creates a resonant field that others can feel and be moved by. Your scars become sources of wisdom, your former confusion becomes compassion for others' confusion, your hard-won clarity becomes a gift you can offer without attachment. The threshold you guard is ultimately the threshold between fragmentation and wholeness, between unconsciousness and awareness, between living from the ego's narrow perspective and living from the self's larger wisdom. But you guard this threshold not by manning it like a sentry, but by embodying the integration that lies on the other side of it, so naturally that others can sense its possibility even if they cannot yet articulate it. Some will be drawn to what they sense in you and will ask questions, seek guidance, request your presence during their own difficult passages. Others will sense something different about you but not be ready to explore what that difference means. Still others will feel threatened by your presence precisely because it reminds them of possibilities they are not yet ready to consider. The guardian learns to receive all of these responses with equal equanimity, understanding that each is perfect for that soul at that moment. This equanimity is not indifference, but the deepest form of respect. Respect for the mystery of each individual's path. Respect for timing that is larger than your own preferences. Respect for the intelligence that guides each soul's evolution according to laws you cannot fully comprehend, but have learned to trust completely. In becoming a guardian of thresholds, you complete the circle of your own transformation. The clarity that once isolated you now connects you more deeply to the human experience. The truth that once felt like a burden now becomes a gift you can offer with open hands. The awakening that once seemed like your personal achievement now reveals itself as part of a larger awakening that includes but transcends any individual consciousness. The guardian stands at the crossroads, not as one who has arrived, but as one who has learned to find home in the journey itself, to be at peace with the ongoing nature of consciousness evolution, to serve the larger awakening while remaining grounded in their own humanity. This is the final gift of the long journey through illusion into clarity, not the achievement of some final enlightened state, but the development of the capacity to be present to whatever is emerging in each moment, in yourself and in others, with equal grace. And so we return to where we began, but we return as different beings, carrying within us all the fire and ash, all the dissolution and integration, all the lonely nights and radiant dawns that have marked our passage through the territories of human consciousness. This is what Nietzsche called the eternal return, not a repetition of the same, but a deepening spiral that brings us back to familiar ground with transformed eyes, back to the same questions with expanded capacity to hold them, back to the same world with a completely different way of being in it. The awakened soul discovers that seeing clearly is not a destination you arrive at and then inhabit forever, but a practice you choose again and again, moment by moment, day by day, year by year. Each morning presents the same fundamental choice. Will you today choose the comfortable blur of collective dreaming, or will you risk again the sometimes sharp clarity of authentic vision? Will you today retreat into the familiar persona that others expect and approve of? Or will you inhabit again the vulnerable authenticity of your true nature? This choice never becomes automatic. never becomes easy in the way the mind wishes it would. The gravitational pull of unconsciousness, of going along to get along, of dimming your inner light to avoid casting uncomfortable shadows. This pull never fully disappears. It is woven into the very fabric of human existence, part of the beautiful and terrible challenge of being a conscious being in a largely unconscious world. But something fundamental has changed in how you meet this eternal choice. Where once the pull toward unconsciousness felt like a failure of will, or a betrayal of your awakening, now you recognize it as part of the very rhythm of consciousness itself. Like breathing, awareness moves in cycles of expansion and contraction, clarity and confusion, remembering and forgetting. The difference is that now you can participate consciously in this rhythm, rather than being unconsciously tossed about by it. You have learned that the goal was never to transcend this rhythm but to dance with it more gracefully. You no longer judge yourself for the moments when the world goes soft around the edges, when the sharp distinctions between truth and illusion blur into something more comfortable, when you find yourself nodding along with conversations that don't quite ring true. These moments are not failures but part of the larger breathing of consciousness, the natural ebb and flow that allows integration to happen at sustainable levels. What matters now is not that you never lose sight of what you've seen, but that you've developed the capacity to see again when seeing is called for. What matters is not that you never slip back into comfortable illusions, but that these illusions no longer have the power to imprison you permanently. You know the way out because you've traveled it so many times. You know the way back to clarity because clarity has become your natural home, even if you sometimes visit other territories. This is perhaps the most profound realization of the eternal return, that awakening is not something you achieve once and then possess forever, but something you participate in continuously, an ongoing relationship with reality that deepens and matures, but never reaches a final completion. Each return to clarity is both a remembering of what you already know and a discovery of something you've never seen before. The spiral nature of consciousness evolution means that you encounter the same fundamental themes again and again, but at deeper levels each time. The question of how to be authentic in an inauthentic world, this question never goes away, but each time you meet it, you bring more wisdom, more experience, more integration. The challenge of loving people while seeing clearly through their defenses and illusions, this challenge remains constant, but your capacity to hold the paradox grows more sophisticated with each encounter. In this eternal returning, you discover that your greatest achievement is not the insights you've gained or the clarity you've developed, but your growing capacity for compassion for others who are struggling with the same fundamental questions you continue to wrestle with, compassion for yourself, as you continue to make the same basic mistakes in new and creative ways, compassion for the human condition itself, with all its beautiful impossibilities and tragic necessities. The awakened soul becomes a compassionate witness to the human drama, including their own ongoing role in it. You learn to watch with gentle amusement as your ego continues to take credit for insights that arose from sources far beyond its comprehension. You observe with tender understanding as your personality continues to want recognition for its wisdom, approval for its clarity, validation for its authenticity. You notice with patient awareness how even your awakening can become another form of identity, another way the ego tries to establish itself as special or superior. But instead of being dismayed by these discoveries, you find yourself laughing, the deep belly laugh of someone who has finally gotten the cosmic joke. The joke is that there is no final awakening, no ultimate enlightenment, no permanent transcendence of the human condition. There is only the ongoing adventure of being a conscious being having a human experience, with all the comedy and tragedy that such an adventure inevitably entails. This laughter is not cynical but celebratory. It emerges from the recognition that the perfection you were seeking was never about becoming a perfect being, but about becoming perfectly yourself, completely, authentically, unapologetically human. The clarity you developed was never meant to lift you above the human condition, but to help you dive more deeply into it, to participate more fully in the grand experiment of consciousness exploring itself through countless individual expressions. In the eternal return, you discover that your journey through the territories of illusion and truth has prepared you not for escape from the human experience, but for fuller participation in it. Every stage you've passed through, the comfortable unconsciousness, the shocking awakening, the period of evangelical urgency, the dark night of misunderstanding, the temptation towards cynicism, the phoenix rising, the guardian's wisdom, all of it has been preparation for this, learning to be completely present to whatever is arising in each moment, without losing your center, your clarity, your compassion. This presence is not static, but dynamic. Not achieved but practiced, not possessed but participated in. Each day offers new opportunities to practice the art of conscious living, new chances to choose authenticity over approval, truth over comfort, love over fear. Each interaction becomes a laboratory for exploring how to be genuinely yourself, while remaining genuinely connected to others. Each challenge becomes an invitation to deepen your integration, to find new ways of embodying the wisdom you've gained through your long journey. The eternal return reveals that the path of awakening is not a straight line from unconsciousness to consciousness, but a spiral that includes both, that embraces the full spectrum of human experience as sacred territory to be explored with awareness and compassion. You learn to be equally present to the moments of crystal clarity and the moments of confusion, to the times of deep connection and the times of lonely alienation, to the experiences of transcendent knowing and the experiences of very human not knowing. In this full spectrum presence, you discover what Jung meant by the integration of opposites. You no longer need to choose between being spiritual and being human, between being wise and being foolish, between being awake and being asleep. You learn to hold all of these apparent contradictions within a larger awareness that finds no conflict between them, that sees them as different faces of the same mystery, different expressions of the same fundamental aliveness. The one who has learned to see through everything discovers that their greatest achievement is not their insight itself, but their ability to remain a loving witness to the human condition in all its forms. This witnessing is not detached observation but engaged participation. You see clearly, but you see with love. You understand deeply, but you understand with humility. You know much, but you know that you know nothing compared to the vast mystery you're participating in. This loving witness becomes your gift to the world, not through any doing or teaching or helping, but simply through your way of being, in choosing again and again to remain present to truth without hardening into righteousness, to stay open-hearted without becoming naive, to be authentic without becoming rigid. You add to the light available to all consciousness. Your commitment to the practice of aware living becomes part of the invisible support system that makes it easier for others to make similar choices. The eternal return is ultimately about service, not service as sacrifice or duty, but service as the natural overflow of a life lived in alignment with its deepest truth. When you have found your way home to yourself, you naturally become a beacon for others who are still finding their way, not because you try to be a beacon, but because authenticity lived fully is itself illuminating. Each morning as you face again the eternal choice between comfortable illusion and sometimes difficult truth, you are not just choosing for yourself, but choosing on behalf of all consciousness. Each time you opt for fluency over approval, you make it slightly easier for others to make the same choice. Each time you choose love over fear, you add to the collective courage available to all beings. This is the ultimate meaning of the eternal return, that your individual journey of awakening is simultaneously a personal adventure and a contribution to the larger awakening of which you are a part. In learning to see clearly while remaining compassionate, in developing wisdom while staying humble, in becoming authentic while remaining connected, you are participating in the great work of consciousness coming to know itself more fully through the beautiful, difficult, sacred experience of being human. The circle completes itself not with arrival but with deeper commitment to the journey itself. You return to where you started, the simple choice to be present, to be authentic, to be awake to what is true in each moment, but you return with everything you've learned, everything you've integrated, everything you've become through your long passage through the territories of human consciousness. And in this return you discover the ultimate truth, that the path itself was always the destination, that the journey itself was always the arrival, that the practice of conscious living was always both the means and the end. In choosing again and again to see clearly while loving deeply, you fulfill the promise you made to yourself when you first began to glimpse that there might be more to life than the comfortable sleep of unconsciousness. The eternal return is the soul's way of saying, I choose this. Again and again. I choose this beautiful, difficult, sacred practice of being awake to what is true, present to what is real, available to what is possible. I choose to be fully human and fully conscious, knowing that this choosing is never finished, never complete, never final, and that this never finished quality is not a flaw in the process, but the very thing that keeps it alive, keeps it fresh, keeps it eternally meaningful. In this choice, made new each day, the circle of awakening completes itself while simultaneously beginning again, deeper and wider and more encompassing than before. Grounded in their own humanity, this is the final gift of the long journey through illusion into clarity, not the achievement of some final enlightened state, but the development of the capacity to be present to whatever is emerging in each moment, in yourself and in others, with equal grace. And so we return to where we began, but we return as different beings, carrying within us all the fire and ash, all the dissolution and integration, all the lonely nights and radiant dawns that have marked our passage through the territories of human consciousness. This is what Nietzsche called the eternal return, not a repetition of the same, but a deepening spiral that brings us back to familiar ground with transformed eyes, back to the same questions with expanded capacity to hold them, back to the same world with a completely different way of being in it. The awakened soul discovers that seeing clearly is not a destination you arrive at and then inhabit forever, but a practice you choose again and again, moment by moment, day by day, year by year. Each morning presents the same fundamental choice. Will you today choose the comfortable blur of collective dreaming, or will you risk again the sometimes sharp clarity of authentic vision? Will you today retreat into the familiar persona that others expect and approve of, or will you inhabit again the vulnerable authenticity of your true nature? This choice never becomes automatic, never becomes easy in the way the mind wishes it would. The gravitational pull of unconsciousness, of going along to get along, of dimming your inner light to avoid casting uncomfortable shadows. This pull never fully disappears. It is woven into the very fabric of human existence, part of the beautiful and terrible challenge of being a conscious being in a largely unconscious world. But something fundamental has changed in how you meet this eternal choice. Where once the pull toward unconsciousness felt like a failure of will, or a betrayal of your awakening, Now you recognize it as part of the very rhythm of consciousness itself. Like breathing, awareness moves in cycles of expansion and contraction, clarity and confusion, remembering and forgetting. The difference is that now you can participate consciously in this rhythm, rather than being unconsciously tossed about by it. You have learned that the goal was never to transcend this rhythm but to dance with it more gracefully. You no longer judge yourself for the moments when the world goes soft around the edges, when the sharp distinctions between truth and illusion blur into something more comfortable, when you find yourself nodding along with conversations that don't quite ring true. These moments are not failures but part of the larger breathing of consciousness, the natural ebb and flow that allows integration to happen at sustainable levels. What matters now is not that you never lose sight of what you've seen, but that you've developed the capacity to see again when seeing is called for. What matters is not that you never slip back into comfortable illusions, but that these illusions no longer have the power to imprison you permanently. You know the way out because you've traveled it so many times. You know the way back to clarity because clarity has become your natural home, even if you sometimes visit other territories. This is perhaps the most profound realization of the eternal return, that awakening is not something you achieve once and then possess forever, but something you participate in continuously, an ongoing relationship with reality that deepens and matures, but never reaches a final completion. Each return to clarity is both a remembering of what you already know and a discovery of something you've never seen before. The spiral nature of consciousness evolution means that you encounter the same fundamental themes again and again, but at deeper levels each time. The question of how to be authentic in an inauthentic world, this question never goes away, but each time you meet it, you bring more wisdom, more experience, more integration. The challenge of loving people while seeing clearly through their defenses and illusions, this challenge remains constant, but your capacity to hold the paradox grows more sophisticated with each encounter. In this eternal returning, you discover that your greatest achievement is not the insights you've gained or the clarity you've developed, but your growing capacity for compassion for others who are struggling with the same fundamental questions you continue to wrestle with, compassion for yourself, as you continue to make the same basic mistakes in new and creative ways, compassion for the human condition itself, with all its beautiful impossibilities and tragic necessities. The awakened soul becomes a compassionate witness to the human drama, including their own ongoing role in it. You learn to watch with gentle amusement as your ego continues to take credit for insights that arose from sources far beyond its comprehension. You observe with tender understanding as your personality continues to want recognition for its wisdom, approval for its clarity, validation for its authenticity. You notice with patient awareness how even your awakening can become another form of identity, another way the ego tries to establish itself as special or superior. But instead of being dismayed by these discoveries, you find yourself laughing, the deep, belly laugh of someone who has finally gotten the cosmic joke. The joke is that there is no final awakening, no ultimate enlightenment, no permanent transcendence of the human condition. There is only the ongoing adventure of being a conscious being having a human experience, with all the comedy and tragedy that such an adventure inevitably entails. This laughter is not cynical but celebratory. It emerges from the recognition that the perfection you were seeking was never about becoming a perfect being, but about becoming perfectly yourself, completely, authentically, unapologetically human. The clarity you developed was never meant to lift you above the human condition, but to help you dive more deeply into it, to participate more fully in the grand experiment of consciousness exploring itself through countless individual expressions. In the eternal return, you discover that your journey through the territories of illusion and truth has prepared you not for escape from the human experience, but for fuller participation in it. Every stage you've passed through, the comfortable unconsciousness, the shocking awakening, the period of evangelical urgency, the dark night of misunderstanding, the temptation towards cynicism, the phoenix rising, the guardian's wisdom, all of it has been preparation for this, learning to be completely present to whatever is arising in each moment, without losing your center, your clarity, your compassion. This presence is not static, but dynamic, not achieved, but practiced, not possessed, but participated in. Each day offers new opportunities to practice the art of conscious living, new chances to choose authenticity over approval, truth over comfort, love over fear. Each interaction becomes a laboratory for exploring how to be genuinely yourself, while remaining genuinely connected to others. Each challenge becomes an invitation to deepen your integration, to find new ways of embodying the wisdom you've gained through your long journey. The eternal return reveals that the path of awakening is not a straight line from unconsciousness to consciousness, but a spiral that includes both, that embraces the full spectrum of human experience as sacred territory to be explored with awareness and compassion. You learn to be equally present to the moments of crystal clarity and the moments of confusion, to the times of deep connection and the times of lonely alienation, to the experiences of transcendent knowing and the experiences of very human not knowing. In this full spectrum presence, you discover what Jung meant by the integration of opposites. You no longer need to choose between being spiritual and being human, between being wise and being foolish, between being awake and being asleep. You learn to hold all of these apparent contradictions within a larger awareness that finds no conflict between them, that sees them as different faces of the same mystery, different expressions of the same fundamental aliveness. The one who has learned to see through everything discovers that their greatest achievement is not their insight itself, but their ability to remain a loving witness to the human condition in all its forms. This witnessing is not detached observation but engaged participation. You see clearly, but you see with love. You understand deeply, but you understand with humility. You know much, but you know that you know nothing compared to the vast mystery you're participating in. This loving witness becomes your gift to the world, not through any doing or teaching or helping, but simply through your way of being, in choosing again and again to remain present to truth without hardening into righteousness, to stay open-hearted without becoming naive, to be authentic without becoming rigid. You add to the light available to all consciousness. Your commitment to the practice of aware living becomes part of the invisible support system that makes it easier for others to make similar choices. The eternal return is ultimately about service, not service as sacrifice or duty, but service as the natural overflow of a life lived in alignment with its deepest truth. When you have found your way home to yourself, you naturally become a beacon for others who are still finding their way, not because you try to be a beacon, but because authenticity lived fully is itself illuminating. Each morning as you face again the eternal choice between comfortable illusion and sometimes difficult truth, you are not just choosing for yourself, but choosing on behalf of all consciousness. Each time you opt for fluency over approval, you make it slightly easier for others to make the same choice. Each time you choose love over fear, you add to the collective courage available to all beings. This is the ultimate meaning of the eternal return, that your individual journey of awakening is simultaneously a personal adventure and a contribution to the larger awakening of which you are a part. In learning to see clearly while remaining compassionate, in developing wisdom while staying humble, in becoming authentic while remaining connected. You are participating in the great work of consciousness coming to know itself more fully through the beautiful, difficult, sacred experience of being human. The circle completes itself not with arrival but with deeper commitment to the journey itself. You return to where you started, the simple choice to be present, to be authentic, to be awake to what is true in each moment. But you return with everything you've learned, everything you've integrated, everything you've become through your long passage through the territories of human consciousness. And in this return you discover the ultimate truth, that the path itself was always the destination, that the journey itself was always the arrival, that the practice of conscious living was always both the means and the end. In choosing again and again to see clearly while loving deeply, you fulfill the promise you made to yourself when you first began to glimpse that there might be more to life than the comfortable sleep of unconsciousness. The eternal return is the soul's way of saying, I choose this. Again and again. I choose this beautiful, difficult, sacred practice of being awake to what is true, present to what is real, available to what is possible. I choose to be fully human and fully conscious, knowing that this choosing is never finished, never complete, never final, and that this never finished quality is not a flaw in the process, but the very thing that keeps it alive, keeps it fresh, keeps it eternally meaningful. In this choice, made new each day, the circle of awakening completes itself while simultaneously beginning again, deeper and wider and more encompassing than before.